Every relationship, no matter how strong, carries moments of misunderstanding. Those quiet storms that test the heart's ability to stay open. But what truly defines a lasting bond isn't the absence of conflict. It's the art of returning to one another after the storm. This series of reflections explores that art, the emotional, biological, and psychological dance of rupture and repair that keeps love alive. Drawing from decades of research in attachment theory, neuroscience, and narrative therapy, the chapters that follow invite you to look beneath the surface of everyday conflict, to the deeper human patterns that shape how we love, argue, and heal. You'll see how our nervous systems, molded in childhood, respond to emotional threat, how communication can regulate not only thoughts, but heartbeats, and how storytelling itself can transform pain into meaning. In these gentle explorations, science meets soul. Each idea is grounded in psychology, yet told through the language of calm reflection, helping us understand why we react the way we do, and how we can respond with greater compassion. Through attachment theory, we learn how early experiences teach the body what safety feels like. Through Gottman's studies of communication, we see how repair attempts, those small gestures of reconciliation, hold more power than grand declarations. And through the lens of narrative therapy, we discover that healing often begins when we learn to rewrite the stories we tell about ourselves and the people we love. This isn't a story of perfection. It's a meditation on resilience, the quiet courage to keep choosing connection, even when it feels easier to withdraw. Each chapter moves like a tide, from the physiology of conflict to the psychology of closure, showing how two people can move from disconnection back to harmony again and again. So, as you listen tonight, let these ideas wash gently over you. You don't need to analyze or memorize them. Just feel their rhythm. Because beneath every theory and every study lies one enduring truth. Love endures, not because it never breaks, but because it learns patiently and tenderly how to mend. And perhaps, as you drift toward rest, you'll remember this simple promise of repair, that no matter how deep the silence, there is always a way back to warmth, understanding, and peace. Section 1. Why conflict is part of love's rhythm.
Chapter 1. How we react when we disagree. The 5 styles of conflict. Conflict is not merely a clash of words, nor a burst of anger that breaks the stillness between two people. It is something far more intricate, a moment when two different worlds meet and try to make sense of one another. Each person brings into that meeting a lifetime of habits, beliefs, and emotions. Every disagreement, whether quiet or loud, reveals how we navigate the delicate balance between protecting ourselves and staying connected to others. Psychologists have long studied these patterns, searching for what guides us when tension arises. Among the many frameworks created, one stands out for its clarity and insight: the Thomas Kilmann conflict model. Rather than seeing arguments as chaos, this model views them as maps of human behavior, showing how people respond when their values, desires, or boundaries collide. At its foundation, the model explores two invisible forces that shape our every reaction: assertiveness and cooperativeness. Assertiveness reflects the degree to which someone strives to satisfy their own needs or uphold what they believe is right. Cooperativeness, in contrast, reveals how much one prioritizes the needs, comfort, or well-being of others. When these two dimensions intersect, they create 5 distinct ways of handling conflict, 5 emotional postures that every person adopts at different moments in life. None of these styles are inherently good or bad. They are simply ways of surviving, protecting harmony, or expressing individuality. Understanding them helps us see that conflict, rather than a disruption of love or respect, is often an invitation to grow, to understand ourselves and others a little more deeply. The competing style. The first way is competing, a style defined by high assertiveness and low cooperativeness. People who lean toward this approach view conflict as a challenge, something to face and overcome. In their minds, issues often appear in sharp contrast: right versus wrong, truth versus error. When tension arises, they act decisively, defending their position with clarity and conviction. This response has its strengths. In moments that demand quick decisions, a leader making a moral judgment, a parent protecting a child, or a team needing firm direction, the competing style can bring stability and action. It cuts through hesitation and provides structure when chaos threatens to take over. But the same clarity that makes this style powerful can also make it rigid. When used excessively, it can become an echo chamber where listening fades. Others may feel unseen, their perspectives dismissed. Beneath that hard edge, however, lies something tender, a deep desire to be respected, to feel that one's voice matters. When recognized, this underlying need often softens defensiveness and allows empathy to emerge. True strength, after all, is not only in standing firm, but in knowing when to yield. The accommodating style. At the opposite end of the spectrum lies accommodating. Low in assertiveness, but high in cooperativeness. These are the peacekeepers, the bridge builders, the ones who soothe tension before it escalates. To them, relations matter more than being right. They are often quick to apologize, to step back, to say, "It's okay," even when something within them still stings. Accommodating behavior is not weakness. It often grows from empathy, from the understanding that peace, in fragile moments, can be more valuable than victory. In many families and friendships, it is this quiet willingness to yield that preserves connection through storms. Yet, when practiced without balance, accommodation can come at a hidden cost. The person who always bends eventually begins to disappear beneath their own kindness. Needs go unspoken. Desires are quietly buried under smiles. Over time, resentment gathers like dust beneath a rug. The heart longs to be heard, but politeness silences it. The lesson here is gentle but profound. Harmony cannot be built on self-erasure. True peace includes the self as well as the other. To care for others well, one must also honor one's own boundaries and truths. The avoiding style. Then comes avoiding, where both assertiveness and cooperativeness are low. People who avoid conflict often appear calm, even detached. They may change the subject, remain silent, or quietly leave when tension builds. To outsiders, this may look like indifference, but avoidance is rarely about not caring. More often, it is about protecting one's peace. Avoiders value emotional safety. They have often learned that confrontation leads to hurt, or that words can wound more deeply than silence. They choose distance over damage. And in certain moments, avoidance is wise. When anger is high, when exhaustion clouds clarity, or when the issue truly is trivial. But when avoidance becomes a pattern, relationships begin to lose their color. Conversations grow shallow. Trust weakens because unspoken concerns linger beneath the surface. The avoided topic doesn't vanish, it transforms into quiet tension. Real calm doesn't come from escaping conflict, it comes from knowing that disagreement can be faced without fear. Learning to stay present, even gently, is how avoidance begins to heal. It is in those small moments of courage, when one finally says, "This hurt me," that honesty becomes the bridge back to connection. The collaborating style. The fourth approach, collaborating, is where both assertiveness and cooperativeness reach their highest expression. It is often called the win-win style, but in truth, it's less about winning and more about understanding. Collaboration transforms conflict into creativity. Those who collaborate see disagreement not as a battle, but as a puzzle to be solved together. It requires patience, curiosity, and the humility to admit that no one holds the full truth alone. Picture two people standing side by side, examining a problem, rather than confronting each other. That small shift in stance changes everything. Collaboration takes time. It means asking questions, exploring feelings, and experimenting with solutions. But it also yields the deepest connection. Think of two partners choosing where to build a life. One loves the pulse of the city, the other the stillness of nature. Rather than compromise half-heartedly, they explore until they find a place that offers both, perhaps a small town, vibrant yet calm. In collaboration, respect becomes the rhythm. The process itself strengthens trust because it teaches that differences are not threats. They are opportunities for growth. The compromising style. Finally, there is compromising, the middle path between assertiveness and cooperativeness. Compromise is the art of balance, where each side gives a little and gains a little. It's practical, efficient, and often the quickest way to restore movement when time or energy is limited. Two coworkers might compromise on project details to meet a deadline. Two siblings might take turns spending holidays with their parents. Compromise acknowledges that while no one gets everything they want, both get enough to keep the bond intact. However, compromise has its limitations. It doesn't always reach the deep harmony of collaboration. Sometimes the middle ground leaves everyone slightly unsatisfied. But there is wisdom in its simplicity, an understanding that human connection does not always need perfection to thrive. Good enough, when chosen with care, can be a quiet
kind of peace, seeing ourselves through the model. When viewed together, these 5 styles form a mirror.
one that gently reflects how we move through tension. Some of us recognize ourselves instantly: the assertive challenger, the peacekeeper, the quiet withdrawer.
Others notice that our reactions change depending on who we're with and how safe we feel. This flexibility is what makes the Thomas Kilmann model so compassionate. It doesn't judge, it reveals. It reminds us that each style, when used consciously, has a purpose. Competing protects boundaries. Accommodating nurtures peace. Avoiding prevents escalation. Compromising maintains fairness. Collaborating builds growth. Conflict, when understood this way, becomes less about right and wrong and more about rhythm. The rhythm of two people learning to dance without stepping on each other's feet. Returning to connection. In the end, conflict is not about defeating someone or proving a point. It is about staying connected while standing in difference. Each of these 5 styles offers a doorway back to understanding, whether through courage, empathy, patience, or creativity. When we begin to see our own patterns with awareness, we start to approach disagreements not with fear, but with gentleness. We realize that the goal isn't to avoid the storm, but to learn how to sail through it together. Because beneath every argument and every misunderstanding, there is a quiet, universal longing, the wish to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood. When we honor that longing in ourselves and in others, even conflict becomes a path toward peace. Chapter 2. When we're unhappy, 4 ways people respond in relationships.
Every relationship, no matter how loving or sincere, eventually meets moments of dissatisfaction. It might be a quiet sense of being unheard, a heaviness that creeps in after a difficult week, or a subtle distance that neither person knows how to name. These feelings are not signs of failure. They are part of the natural rhythm of connection. What truly shapes a relationship's future is not whether unhappiness appears, but how we respond to it when it does. Psychologists Carol Rusbolt and Isabella Zembrot devoted years to studying these moments, those fragile spaces where affection meets frustration, and where the human heart decides whether to move closer or to pull away. From their research came the Rusbolt-Zembrot model, a simple yet profound way to understand our emotional reflexes when relationships begin to strain. At its core, the model observes behavior through 2 dimensions. One distinguishes between constructive and destructive actions, and the other between active and passive responses. When these 2 dimensions intersect, they form a kind of emotional compass, a map of 4 different ways people respond when something feels broken. Each way tells a story about how we love, how we fear, and how we try, sometimes imperfectly, to protect what matters most. 1. The exit response, when pain turns into motion. The first path is called exit, an active but destructive reaction. This is the moment when pain takes charge and begins to move. The person acts out of hurt, anger, or hopelessness, doing something that may harm the bond rather than heal it. Exit can take many forms. It might look like raising one's voice in an argument, slamming a door, walking out, or deciding abruptly to end a partnership. Sometimes it's not physical at all. It's emotional withdrawal disguised as finality, that feeling of, I'm done. Yet beneath this reaction often lies a deep ache, not malice. Many who choose exit are not trying to destroy what they had. They simply no longer believe that change is possible. They have grown weary of feeling unseen, unheard, or unvalued. In their minds, leaving seems easier than hoping. It's a form of self-protection, the body's way of saying, I cannot bear this pain any longer. And while exit can indeed be destructive, it is also deeply human. The drive to escape suffering is one of our oldest instincts. But when we begin to notice what sits behind that impulse, the longing to be acknowledged, to be understood, we can start to soften its hold. Sometimes the real act of courage is not walking away, but daring to stay long enough to be heard. 2. The voice response, when courage speaks through the heart. At the opposite end lies voice, the active but constructive response. This is the choice to face dissatisfaction not with anger or silence, but with dialogue. It's the willingness to say, something feels wrong, and I want to make it right. A person using the voice response brings issues to light rather than letting them grow in the dark. They ask questions, seek help, or start calm conversations that invite understanding. Saying, "Can we talk about what's been bothering us?" might seem simple, but in tense moments, it takes tremendous bravery. Psychologists often describe voice as the healthiest of the four responses because it strengthens communication. But it isn't easy. Speaking up requires emotional maturity, the ability to hold discomfort without turning it into blame. It asks us to stay present when the easier choice might be withdrawal. Using one's voice is an act of faith, faith that words can heal, that openness will be met with listening, that a relationship can grow through honesty. In this way, voice is more than a behavioral pattern. It's an expression of hope. Each time we choose it, we plant a small seed of repair, proof that even conflict can lead to closeness when handled with care. 3. The loyalty response, when patience becomes love's quiet guardian. The third path is loyalty, which is passive but constructive. This is the stillness of staying, the quiet waiting of someone who believes the relationship can heal itself with time. Loyalty does not demand attention, it holds space. In long marriages, lifelong friendships, or family bonds, loyalty is often what keeps love alive through hardship. It's seen when one partner waits patiently for the other to rediscover their warmth, or when a friend continues to check in even after weeks of silence. It's an act of faith, the belief that what was once good can become good again. But loyalty carries its own shadow. When patience replaces communication, when endurance becomes silence, a quiet ache begins to grow. Sometimes we stay not because hope remains, but because we're afraid of what leaving might mean. True loyalty isn't about tolerating neglect or pain. It's about trusting in the relationship's strength while also respecting one's own needs. Healthy loyalty says, I'll stay, but I'll also speak. It pairs faith with honesty. Without that balance, loyalty can slowly transform into self-abandonment, and love, deprived of truth, starts to fade. 4. The neglect response, when care quietly slips away. The final quadrant is neglect, a reaction both passive
and destructive. Unlike exit, neglect doesn't explode, it erodes. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, over days and months. Conversations shorten, small gestures disappear. The laughter that once filled the air becomes rare, replaced by silence that feels heavier than words. In psychological terms, neglect is the slow withdrawal of emotional investment. It's what occurs when someone stops trying, not because they wish harm, but because they feel depleted. The phrase, "it doesn't matter anymore," becomes a kind of resignation, a soft closing of the heart. Yet awareness can change everything. The moment someone notices the pattern, the stillness that feels too quiet, the warmth that's gone missing, is the moment the relationship begins to breathe again. Even the smallest gesture of care, like asking, "How are you really?" can start to thaw the distance that neglect leaves behind. Understanding the model. Mirrors of the human heart. What makes the Rusbolt-Zembrodt model so deeply compassionate is that it doesn't divide people into villains and heroes. It simply shows how each of us, in our own way, tries to manage pain. Our choices, whether to shout, speak, wait, or retreat, all emerge from the same longing, the wish to feel safe and valued. Each person carries a blend of these responses. Some use the voice when they feel secure, but slip into exit when fear rises. Others hold on with loyalty for years until fatigue quietly turns it into neglect. None of these tendencies define who we are. They are merely strategies learned over time, the ways our hearts learn to survive. To recognize our own pattern is to take the first step toward change. If we find ourselves withdrawing, we might ask, "What am I protecting?" If we feel the urge to walk away, we can pause and wonder, is there still room for conversation? And if we've been waiting too long in silence, perhaps it's time to speak with kindness once more. Returning to hope. Every relationship, even the healthiest, will encounter dissatisfaction. But unhappiness does not have to destroy connection. The very moment we begin to observe our reactions, to see whether we are acting, waiting, or drifting, we open the door to choice. Awareness transforms reaction into response. It reminds us that pain doesn't have to end in distance. It can become a bridge, a quiet signal that something needs care, not abandonment. At its core, every psychological model, every scientific framework about love and behavior whispers the same truth. Relationships endure not because conflict never comes, but because people learn how to mend after it. Even when we falter, even when silence stretches too long, the capacity to return remains
Within us. A single act of awareness, a word, a gesture, a moment of listening can begin the process of renewal. And in that gentle return lies the essence of love itself. The courage to rebuild again and again, no matter how many times the bond has been tested by time, silence, or misunderstanding. Because love, like all living things, does not thrive by avoiding pain.
It grows by learning how to heal. Chapter 3. How repeated arguments turn into emotional loops.
When two people care deeply for each other, it's tempting to believe that love alone will create peace, that closeness will automatically lead to understanding. Yet the truth of human connection is more complex and far more delicate. Even the most devoted bonds, the ones built on years of affection and shared experience, are not immune to friction. Every relationship, whether between partners, family members, or close friends, has moments when emotions collide, words falter, and both people walk away feeling unseen. Psychologists have long observed that when these moments go unhealed, they tend to repeat themselves. The same argument, the same tone, the same familiar hurt begins to loop through time like an old song that refuses to end. These recurring patterns are what researchers call maladaptive conflict cycles, repetitive ways of relating that feel impossible to escape. Instead of resolving tension, the cycle traps both people in a rhythm of misunderstanding, frustration, and emotional distance. The demand-withdraw cycle, the loop of longing and retreat. One of the most studied examples of this pattern is known as the demand-withdraw cycle. It begins innocently, often with love itself. One person senses distance, perhaps a lack of affection, a quiet mood, or a gap in communication, and begins to reach out. They want to talk, to reconnect, to repair what feels off. This is the demand side of the loop. Meanwhile, the other person, overwhelmed by tension or afraid of conflict, begins to retreat. They withdraw, hoping that silence will calm things down or that space will make the discomfort fade. But instead of soothing the situation, this withdrawal amplifies the anxiety of the one reaching out. The more one pursues closeness, the more the other pulls away, and the cycle deepens. Psychologists describe this as a pursuer-distancer dynamic, and it's astonishingly common. Neither person is the villain. The one who demands often feels lonely and desperate for reassurance. The one who withdraws may feel attacked or helpless, unsure how to respond without making things worse. Yet their very efforts to protect themselves, through pursuit or retreat, inadvertently feed each other's fears. What begins as a plea for understanding slowly transforms into mutual pain. Over time, conversations that once aimed for closeness begin to feel like battlefields. Words become weapons, and silence becomes armor. Eventually, the relationship starts to feel unsafe. Not because of a lack of love, but because connection itself has come to feel risky.
How conflict resurface as emotional echoes. When these patterns go unresolved, they rarely fade on their own. Instead, they resurface in what psychologists call serial arguments. The same disagreements replayed again and again, each time with sharper tones and heavier hearts. What might begin as a small disagreement about daily habits, who does the chores, who forgot an errand, becomes charged with layers of unspoken history. This is where a fascinating concept known as social allergies emerges. Researchers use this term to describe the way small behaviors start to provoke outsized emotional reactions over time. A sigh, a glance, a misplaced cup on the table, each small trigger awakens the emotional memory of countless unresolved conflicts. It's not the present moment that hurts, it's the accumulation of the past that echoes through it. Neuroscience helps explain this phenomenon. When we experience repeated conflict, our brains begin to associate certain cues, tones of voice, facial expressions, even gestures, with emotional threat. These cues activate the amygdala, the brain's alarm system,
which prepares the body for defense rather than dialogue. The result is that a simple conversation can suddenly feel like survival. The hidden toll of repetition. These emotional loops don't just affect how we feel, they also leave physiological traces. Studies in relationship psychology and health science have shown that chronic conflict elevates cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. High cortisol levels sustained over time can impair immune function, disturb sleep, and even affect cardiovascular health. The body, in many ways, keeps the emotional score. When arguments become cyclical and unresolved, love begins to feel heavy. What once felt nurturing turns exhausting. The nervous system learns to anticipate tension instead of safety, and the heart grows cautious where it once was open. But these findings also hold hope. They show that healing a relationship is not just an emotional act, it's a biological one. Rebuilding safety and trust allows the body to relax again, to return to a state where calm, empathy, and affection can flourish. The power of turning toward. Fortunately, research also reveals something profoundly encouraging. Even deeply ingrained conflict patterns can change. The key lies in a simple yet transformative act, turning toward each other instead of away. When two people pause the cycle, when they choose to listen, to reflect, and to repair, they begin to rewrite the script of their connection. Small gestures can carry immense weight. Saying, "I think I misunderstood you," or "I see how that hurt you," may sound modest, but these words signal safety. They tell the nervous system that the threat is over and that connection is possible again. Relationship expert John Gottman's decades of research support this. He found that couples who master the art of repair attempts, small efforts to de-escalate tension, are far more likely to thrive. It's not the absence of conflict that predicts lasting love, but the ability to move through it with gentleness and curiosity. When people learn to turn toward each other after conflict, to replace accusation with understanding, to listen instead of defend, something remarkable happens. Emotional safety returns. The loop of argument becomes a circle of growth. Conflict as a teacher.
In truth, every rupture in connection carries within it a hidden invitation. Conflict, when faced with awareness, becomes a teacher. It reveals what each person needs, fears, and values. It points out the places where love still has room to mature. When two people dare to repair after hurting each other, when they apologize sincerely, forgive freely, and try again, they are not merely patching up what was broken. They are building something stronger than before, a bond tested by fire and tempered by empathy. Relationships do not endure because they are free of tension. They endure because both people learn how to stay gentle in the middle of it. Each repair is an act of renewal, a reminder that love is not a static feeling, but an ongoing choice. The gentle art of beginning again. So if you ever find yourself circling the same argument, feeling as though you're trapped in a loop, remember this. It's not a sign that your relationship has failed. It's a sign that something within it is asking for care. Patterns repeat because they seek resolution. Connection is a living thing, and like all living things, it needs attention, tenderness, and repair. Every apology, every attempt to listen, every moment of softness is a thread that strengthens the bond once more. In the quiet act of trying again lies the real beauty of love, not in its perfection, but in its resilience. Because love, when understood deeply, is not the absence of struggle. It is the courage to return, again and again, to the shared space between two hearts, to rebuild trust, to rediscover safety, and to keep choosing each other even after the hardest storms have passed. And that, perhaps, is the truest measure of intimacy. Not never fighting, but always finding a way back.
Section 2. The Gentle Art of Repair. Chapter 4. How Small Gestures Heal Big Wounds. The 6 Repair Categories. When two people share a life together, it's natural to hope for harmony, for laughter to come easily, and for disagreements to fade quickly. But even the most loving relationships are not immune to tension. Words can sting. Silences can stretch. A single misunderstanding can grow into something that feels larger than it should. Yet what separates relationships that endure from those that crumble isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of repair. Psychologist John Gottman, who spent decades studying thousands of couples in his research lab known as the Love Lab, found that the strongest relationships aren't those that never argue, but those that know how to find their way back after they do. He called this process the art of repair. And from his research came something gentle yet powerful: the Gottman Repair Checklist. It isn't a list of rules or quick fixes, it's a language of empathy, humility, and tenderness. A collection of simple phrases and gestures that help two people soften the edges of hurt and rediscover safety when things feel broken. The checklist doesn't ask who's right or wrong. It doesn't promise to solve every disagreement. Instead, it guides partners to reconnect when the emotional distance between them feels wide. It reminds us that beneath frustration, there is often a softer truth, a longing to be heard, a wish to be respected, or a quiet fear of losing closeness. Gottman's framework groups these small repair attempts into 6 categories, each one a gentle doorway back to understanding. 1. I feel. Speaking from the heart. The first and most fundamental repair is naming your emotions. It may sound simple, but in the middle of conflict, few things are harder. Most of us have been taught to defend ourselves, not to reveal ourselves. Instead of saying, "You never listen," which invites defensiveness, we can say, "I feel unheard," or "That hurt my feelings." These tiny shifts transform the energy of a conversation. They turn accusation into communication. They invite empathy rather than resistance. In psychology, this is known as emotional labeling, the act of putting feelings into words. Studies show that naming emotions reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and activates regions associated with self-regulation and reasoning. In other words, describing your feelings literally calms the brain. Imagine a partner who says, "When you interrupted me earlier, I felt dismissed." The other person can respond not with defensiveness, but curiosity. "I didn't realize that. Tell me more." That single exchange transforms tension into understanding. Because when emotions are named, they start to soften. 2. Sorry. The courage to acknowledge. The second category is one of the most disarming and healing words in any language: sorry. Apologies are often misunderstood. People think saying sorry means surrendering the argument, but in truth, it means choosing connection over pride. A sincere apology, "I overreacted," or "I can see how that hurt you," signals maturity and safety. It says, "Our relationship matters more to me than being right." Apologies do not erase the past, but they open the future. Neuroscientists have found that hearing a genuine apology activates areas of the brain associated with empathy and trust. In long-term relationships, frequent repair through apology helps reset emotional equilibrium after conflict, making forgiveness easier and resentment slower to build. Apologies are bridges. They shorten the distance that conflict creates. Even a small, quiet one can bring the heart back home. 3. I need to calm down. Knowing when to pause. Every human being has a limit, a threshold beyond which emotions become too overwhelming to think clearly. Gottman calls this state emotional flooding. It's when the nervous system is overloaded with stress hormones, making calm reasoning nearly impossible. When we're flooded, our bodies respond as if to danger. Heart rate rises, breathing quickens, and the ability to listen disappears. In those moments, continuing the argument does more harm than good. That's why one of the most loving repair moves is to say, "I need a moment to calm down," or "Can we take a short break?" These phrases are not avoidance, they are protection. They give both people space to regulate, to breathe, and to return when hearts are quieter. Scientific studies on conflict show that taking even a 20-minute pause to relax, through breathing, walking, or silent reflection, allows cortisol levels to drop and emotional control to return. It's not weakness to step away, it's wisdom. 4. Stop action. The gentle break. Sometimes, conflicts spin faster than either person can manage. Voices rise, tone sharpens, and words begin to wound. At these moments, the stop-action repair is like an emergency brake for the relationship. Saying, "We're getting off track," or "This is becoming hurtful," is not rejection, it's love in its most mindful form. It's saying, "Let's protect our bond before our emotions do damage." These gentle interventions remind both people that the goal isn't to win, it's to stay connected. Many couples develop personal signals, a raised hand, a phrase like "time out," or even humor to pause the momentum. It may feel awkward at first, but over time it becomes a language of care. Because sometimes what saves a relationship is not what is said, but what is stopped before it can cause harm. 5. Get to yes. Finding common ground. The fifth category is about rediscovering agreement, even in disagreement. Get to yes means noticing where understanding already exists and building from there. It can sound like, "I see what you mean," or "You're right about that part." These words, though small, dissolve defensiveness. They remind both people that they're not enemies standing on opposite sides, but partners facing the same challenge from different angles. Psychologists describe this as reframing, the ability to shift from a competitive mindset to a collaborative one. In long-term relationships, this mental shift reduces conflict recurrence and increases perceived closeness. Think of a couple disagreeing about finances. Instead of arguing over how money is spent, they might realize they both care about why, about security, comfort, or shared dreams. Finding even a single yes transforms opposition into teamwork. When we search for agreement, we begin to remember that we're on the same side. 6. I appreciate. gratitude in the midst of tension. Finally, there is the softest yet most powerful repair of all: appreciation. In moments of conflict, gratitude acts like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Saying, "Thank you for hearing me," or "I love that you're trying," reconnects both hearts to what lies beneath the argument: genuine care. Research in positive psychology consistently shows that expressing gratitude, even in small doses, strengthens relationships. It shifts the brain's focus from threat to safety, from criticism to connection. Imagine a couple who, after a difficult talk, end with a simple, "I'm glad we can talk like this." That phrase doesn't erase the disagreement, but it transforms the emotional atmosphere. It reminds both people of the friendship that exists beneath the friction. Appreciation doesn't deny the storm. It reminds us that the sun still exists above it. The art of repair. When seen together, these 6 categories: I feel, sorry, I need to calm down, stop action, get to yes, and I appreciate, form more than a checklist. They form a language of love in motion. They show that relationships don't thrive on perfection. They thrive on the willingness to repair again and again. Every small gesture, a sincere apology, a moment of pause, a word of thanks, becomes a thread that strengthens the fabric of connection. Love, in its truest form, is not about avoiding conflict. It's about learning how to return.
So tonight, as you rest, you might reflect on this gentle truth. Every "I'm sorry," every "let's take a breath," every "I still care" is not just a sentence, it's a bridge. A quiet, steady reminder that relationships, like the people in them, are always in the process of healing, always learning to begin again. Because love, when tended with small, mindful gestures, becomes something resilient, not unbreakable, but unafraid to be mended.
Chapter 5. What makes an apology work, and why some don't. Every relationship, no matter how strong or sincere, eventually reaches moments of strain. A conversation takes a wrong turn. A tone sharpens. A silence stretches longer than it should. In those moments, one or both people often try to bridge the gap. With a soft, "I'm sorry," a gentle touch, or a small joke to lighten the air. But sometimes, it doesn't work. The words are right, yet they fall into silence. The partner turns away, unmoved. The warmth that once connected 2 hearts feels distant and unreachable. Psychologist John Gottman, whose decades of research have transformed how we understand love, spent much of his career studying these fragile turning points, the moments when couples try to repair a rupture. What he discovered is both surprising and deeply comforting. The success of a repair attempt doesn't depend solely on what is said or how beautifully it's said. You can speak in the softest tone with all the right words and still fail to reach the person you love. The real key, Gottman found, lies beneath the words, in what he calls the emotional bank account. It's a simple metaphor, but it reveals something profound about how relationships survive and heal. The emotional bank account. Imagine that every act of kindness, every shared laugh, every small gesture of attention is like a deposit into a shared emotional account between 2 people. Each moment of care, a warm smile, a thank you, a reassuring hug, builds balance in that account. Over time, these little moments accumulate into a deep sense of safety and trust. When the account is healthy and full, conflict becomes survivable. You can make mistakes, say the wrong thing, or stumble through an apology and still be heard. Because the foundation beneath the words is strong,
The listener can feel the sincerity behind them. The relationship itself carries the weight of forgiveness. But when the balance runs low, when criticism replaces kindness, when contempt takes root, when one or both partners stop showing affection, the same words that once healed can sound hollow. An apology that might have mended a hurt in the past suddenly feels manipulative, forced, or empty. The difference isn't the phrase, it's the emotional climate in which the phrase is spoken.
The invisible thread of connection. In one of Gottman's most famous long-term studies, he observed newlywed couples interacting in ordinary, everyday settings. Years later, he revisited them. The results were striking. Couples who had remained happily married turned toward each other's small bids for connection, those little gestures of attention, nearly 86% of the time. Those who later divorced had done so only 33% of the time. What does that mean in real life? It means that love endures not because of grand declarations or perfect apologies, but because of thousands of small moments of acknowledgement. When one partner says, "Look at that sunset," and the other responds, "It's beautiful," that's a tiny deposit. When someone says, "How was your day?" or laughs at a partner's small joke, that's another deposit. These are the quiet moments that keep the emotional bank account rich and full. When those small gestures are frequent, even conflict feels safer. A misunderstanding doesn't shake the foundation because both people know deeply that the bond between them is good. The emotional thread is strong enough to stretch without breaking. Why some apologies fail. An apology fails when it lands on barren soil, when years of unspoken resentment, dismissiveness, or emotional neglect have depleted trust. Imagine trying to plant a seed in dry ground. No matter how carefully you water it, nothing grows. The soil first needs to be nourished. Similarly, for an apology to take root, the relationship must already hold a sense of goodwill. Without that, even the most sincere, "I'm sorry," struggles to be heard. The listener's heart, already guarded, interprets the words through past pain. "You've said this before. Why should I believe you now?" This doesn't mean repair is hopeless when trust is low, only that rebuilding begins long before the next apology. It starts with restoring small gestures of connection, noticing, listening, thanking, reaching out. These quiet moments slowly replenish the emotional balance, allowing warmth to return where defensiveness once lived. The gentle science of maintenance. Gottman's findings remind us that relationships are not like machines that can simply be fixed when something breaks. They are living systems, organic, breathing, constantly evolving. And like all living systems, they need ongoing care. Think of the emotional bank account as a garden. It thrives through regular attention, through the sunlight of laughter, the water of gratitude, and the steady nourishment of empathy. If neglected, even the most beautiful garden will wither, but with consistent care, it grows resilient. So when conflict does come, as it always will, repair becomes easier. Even an imperfect apology can heal because love itself provides the context for forgiveness. A partner doesn't need to hear flawless words. They need to feel the presence of goodwill. In relationships rich with affection, even clumsy efforts to reconnect, a small smile after a fight, a simple "can we start again?" carry weight. These gestures say, "I still choose you." They remind both people that love is not about winning arguments, but about finding the courage to return to each other again and again.
The true meaning of repair. The art of repair, Gottman concluded, begins long before the argument itself. It's not a reaction, it's a way of living. It's built in the ordinary rhythm of daily kindness, the good mornings, the shared meals, the small compliments that say, I notice you. When these moments accumulate, they form a quiet history of care, a foundation strong enough to hold both joy and pain. From this foundation, apologies stop being mere words. They become believable reflections of something deeper, a relationship that has already proven, time and again, that love is steady and real. So when you think about repair, think not of mending after a storm, but of tending before it. It's in the way you listen without interrupting, or the way you reach for your partner's hand in passing. It's in the way you stay gentle even when you're tired. These are not small things. They are the quiet architecture of emotional safety. Because in the end, what makes an apology work is not eloquence, but history. The invisible record of kindness, trust, and care that turns words into truth. Repair, then, is not a single act. It is a reflection of everything that came before it, every laugh shared, every moment of patience, every simple "I love you," left unspoken but felt. And perhaps the greatest comfort of all is this: even when words fail, love remembers. The heart keeps record of tenderness, and in that memory, that deep reservoir of goodwill, every apology, no matter how imperfect, has a chance to reach home.
Section 3. Healing the Heart. Empathy, Apology, and Forgiveness. Chapter 6. Empathy, the quiet bridge that brings hearts back together. Empathy is one of humanity's most remarkable abilities. It's the invisible bridge that allows one heart to reach another, a quiet force that turns misunderstanding into understanding and distance into connection. In many ways, empathy is the heartbeat of every healthy relationship. Without it, even love can feel cold. With it, even pain can become a path toward healing. When we experience empathy, something extraordinary happens. We set aside the instinct to defend ourselves and instead allow another person's feelings to reach us. It's not about agreeing with everything they say or losing our own point of view. It's about creating space. Space for another person's truth to exist beside our own. Think of a time when someone looked at you and truly saw what you were feeling. When they didn't rush to fix you, argue, or offer advice, they simply understood. That feeling, that moment of being seen, is what empathy gives. It's not loud or dramatic. It's soft, like a light turned on in a dark room. The science of shared emotion. Modern psychology shows that empathy isn't just an emotional ideal, it's built into the structure of the human brain. Functional MRI studies reveal that when we witness someone in distress, the same neural pathways that process our own pain begin to activate. These are called mirror neurons, and they are part of what makes us social beings. When one person hurts, another's brain echoes that hurt in miniature. This biological resonance explains why empathy can calm tension faster than logic ever could. When someone says, "I can see how that made you feel small," or "I didn't realize how deeply that hurt you," it reaches the nervous system. The body begins to relax. The heart rate slows. The brain releases oxytocin, the same hormone linked to trust and bonding. It's as if both people's physiology begins to move towards safety at the same time. Empathy, in this sense, is not merely emotional, it is also physical. The body recognizes connection even before the mind fully understands it. How empathy changes the course of conflict. In moments of disagreement, our natural instinct is often to explain or defend. We want to be heard, to prove that we're right, or at least not to be misunderstood.
Yet empathy asks something very different of us. It asks us to pause, to listen not for accuracy, but for emotion. Imagine someone close to you saying, "You never listen to me." The defensive mind immediately prepares a response. "That's not true. I always listen." But empathy steps in and whispers, "Wait, what is this person really feeling?" Perhaps what they mean is, "I feel invisible. I need to feel that I matter." When you answer that feeling instead of the accusation, perhaps with, "I didn't realize you felt that way. Tell me what I missed," the conversation shifts from blame to belonging. Empathy doesn't erase conflict, it softens it. It gives both people room to stay human while they figure things out. Empathy as emotional gravity. Think of empathy as emotional gravity, a force that pulls two people back together after misunderstanding has pushed them apart. It doesn't drag or demand, it gently draws hearts closer. Research shows that when people feel understood, their defensive walls come down. They become more open to compromise, more willing to listen, and more likely to forgive. The psychologist Carl Rogers once called empathy the necessary and sufficient condition for healing, not because it fixes everything instantly, but because it makes healing possible. You can feel this shift in real life. Think of how anger starts to fade when someone truly gets you. A friend who says, "That must have been hard," or a partner who says, "I can see how that hurt you," can dissolve tension in seconds that hours of arguing could never fix. It's not magic, it's emotional attunement. The moment we feel seen, we stop fighting to be seen. Empathy in everyday life. Empathy doesn't always come naturally, especially when we're hurt, but it can be practiced. It begins with curiosity, with the willingness to ask, what might this feel like for them? Try this in daily life. When someone reacts sharply, pause before judging. Maybe their frustration hides fatigue. When someone withdraws, perhaps they are scared, not cold. Empathy is not mind reading. It's choosing compassion when confusion tempts us to assume the worst. One small act of empathy can change an entire day. A teacher who listens to a struggling student without scolding. A partner who says, "I know this has been hard on you." A friend who quietly sits beside you when you can't find words. These moments build the invisible architecture of trust, brick by brick, breath by breath. The transformative power of empathy. What makes empathy so profound is its universality. Across cultures, languages, and beliefs, the human response to being understood is the same. Shoulders relax, voices soften, the body, which had been guarding itself, begins to let go. Empathy reminds us of something ancient and enduring, that we are connected not by agreement, but by shared fragility. Every person knows what it feels like to be dismissed, misunderstood, or unseen. When we recognize this, it becomes harder to stay angry and easier to stay kind. Studies in behavioral psychology confirm that when people take even a brief moment to imagine another person's inner world, their desire for revenge decreases, their ability to forgive increases. Empathy turns emotional opposition into cooperation, not by erasing difference, but by acknowledging humanity. Empathy as the first step toward healing. In relationships, empathy is the spark that ignites all other forms of repair. Without it, apologies sound mechanical and forgiveness feels unreachable. With it, even silence begins to heal. Empathy is often the first moment the heart starts to open after being closed for too long. It's the gentle turning of the soul toward another person, whispering, "I see you. I still care." When empathy enters a room, the air changes. Arguments lose their sharpness.
blame softens into understanding, and two people who once stood on opposite sides of pain begin slowly to meet in the middle. As you drift into rest tonight, perhaps you can reflect on this quiet truth. Empathy does not ask us to fix, to win, or to be perfect. It simply asks us to feel, to be present for someone else's experience as if it were our own. Because in the end, it's not logic or persuasion that heals relationships. It's the simple, ancient act of one human heart saying to another, "You're not alone."
Chapter 7. The Anatomy of an Apology That Truly Heals. An apology is one of the simplest gestures we can make, and yet it has the power to shift the entire emotional landscape between two people. At its core, it's not just a phrase, it's an act of humility. A true apology says, "I see your pain, and I recognize that I played a part in it." It's a bridge, fragile yet profound, built between two hearts that momentarily lost sight of each other. But not all bridges hold. Some apologies, though well-intentioned, collapse before they reach the other side. The words sound right, but they ring hollow. Instead of healing, they reopen wounds, leaving the other person feeling unheard or unseen. Why does this happen? Why do some apologies restore connection while others deepen the distance? Psychologists have spent decades studying this question, and their findings reveal something beautifully human. A true apology is less about words and more about emotional truth. It's not a performance designed to smooth things over quickly. It's not about preserving pride or controlling outcomes. It's about validating another person's experience. Saying, in essence, "Your feelings make sense. What happened to you matters." The subtle power of language. The difference between an apology that heals and one that wounds can come down to a few simple words. Consider the phrase, "I'm sorry you feel hurt." On the surface, it sounds considerate, but listen closely and you'll hear a quiet deflection. The speaker hasn't taken ownership of what happened. Instead, they've shifted the focus on the listener's reaction. It implies that the pain may be a misunderstanding or even an overreaction. Now compare it with, "I'm sorry I hurt you." In that moment, the speaker stands in the truth of their impact. No excuses, no hedging, no deflection. Just acknowledgement. That small linguistic shift transforms defensiveness into empathy. It turns distance into connection. At its essence, an apology is not about proving who was right. It's about affirming that someone's experience was real. It tells the other person, "You're not invisible here." The first element, responsibility. The first pillar of a healing apology is acknowledging responsibility. It is the willingness to say, "I made a mistake." People don't expect perfection from us. What they crave is honesty. Hearing someone admit their part without evasion or justification restores a sense of balance in the emotional equation. It signals maturity and respect. In relationships, unacknowledged pain tends to grow silently, but when one partner says, "I know my words hurt you," the dynamic changes. The hurt person doesn't have to fight for recognition anymore. The emotional tension begins to ease because accountability restores dignity. In the language of repair, responsibility is the moment we stop defending ourselves and start rebuilding trust. The second element, remorse. Responsibility is the structure, but remorse is the heartbeat of a real apology. It's not about self-pity or guilt, it's about empathy in motion. True remorse says, "I can feel, even a little, what this did to you." Studies in affective neuroscience reveal that when we feel remorse sincerely, our brains activate the same neural pathways used in empathy and caregiving. In other words, remorse is not just an emotion, it's a bridge between two nervous systems.
It helps calm defensiveness, opens communication, and makes reconciliation physiologically easier. When you say, "I feel awful that I made you doubt yourself," you're not just describing a feeling, you're showing care. That care tells the listener, "Your pain has reached me." And once that happens, healing begins to flow in both directions. The element of explanation, without excuse. A gentle explanation can sometimes help, but only if it's offered with humility, not self-defense. Explaining what led to a mistake can bring clarity, helping the other person understand context or intention. But when an explanation turns into justification, "I only did that because you made me angry," the healing stops. Effective explanations are brief, sincere, and transparent. They don't aim to erase what happened. They help the listener see that the harm wasn't born from disregard. They remind the other person that beneath the mistake, care still exists. Think of it as explanations clarify, but excuses cloud. The moment your words begin to sound like you're protecting yourself, empathy disappears. The fourth element, repair in action. The next step, and perhaps the most powerful, is the offer of repair. This is when words become promises. A real apology doesn't stop at, "I'm sorry." It moves forward to ask, "How can I make this right?" Or, "What can I do differently so this doesn't happen again?" These are not performances of guilt, they are commitments to growth. They show a readiness to take responsibility not just for the past, but for the future. Psychologists have found that when an apology includes this component of repair, trust rebuilds faster, and relationships become stronger than before the conflict. Action is the proof of remorse. It's what turns intention into transformation. The least important words. Interestingly, the phrase, "Please forgive me," ranks lowest when it comes to healing. That's because forgiveness cannot be demanded. It must arise freely, in its own time. When someone rushes forgiveness, it can feel like pressure rather than peace. The true strength of an apology lies not in the plea for forgiveness, but in the courage to face what was broken. When you take responsibility and begin to repair, forgiveness often becomes a natural consequence rather than a forced request. The psychology of healing through apology. What makes a genuine apology so powerful isn't just its emotional honesty, it's its ability to recalibrate the nervous system. When someone acknowledges your pain and expresses remorse, the body begins to relax. The heart rate slows, cortisol levels drop, and oxytocin, the bonding hormone, rises. You can feel this in your body when someone finally says, "I understand how much I hurt you." The tension that's been coiled inside you for days or weeks begins to unravel. The body, in its wisdom, recognizes safety even before the mind fully does. That's why heartfelt apologies often bring tears. They're a physical release, not just an emotional one. The gift of a true apology. A true apology is both confession and gift. It doesn't erase the past, but it clears the fog between two hearts so they can see each other again. It says, "This connection matters more to me than my pride." Even the simplest, most awkward attempt, if sincere, can heal more than the most eloquent but hollow words. It's not perfection that soothes, it's presence. Think of a friend who stumbles through an apology, struggling to find the right words, but whose eyes show honesty. You can feel it. The sincerity outweighs the phrasing. That's because apology is not a script, it's a shared moment of truth. The courage to begin again. If you ever find yourself standing in the fragile silence after a misunderstanding, remember this: repair doesn't require eloquence, only sincerity. The right words, when spoken from a heart willing to take responsibility, can open doors long thought closed.
Apology is not about rewriting the past, it's about rebuilding the bridge that leads to the future. It is love choosing to kneel, pride choosing to soften, and the human spirit choosing connection over defense. So as you drift toward rest tonight, perhaps let this thought rest with you. Peace doesn't begin when we forget what happened. It begins when we find the courage to say, "I'm sorry, and I mean it."
Chapter 8. Why Apology Calms Both the Mind and Body. When human hearts collide, through misunderstanding, betrayal, or words spoken too quickly, the wounds that follow are never just emotional. They ripple through the body, changing the rhythm of our breath, tightening our chest, and quickening our heartbeat. The body carries the story of every argument, every moment of rejection, every unresolved silence. And yet, within this fragile landscape, one act has the quiet power to bring both mind and body back into balance: the act of a sincere apology. Apology is often seen as moral or social, something polite people do to repair manners or restore peace. But science now shows that apology is not only an emotional gesture, it is also a biological signal. It tells the nervous system that the storm is passing, that safety is returning. It tells the mind that connection, once broken, might still be possible. The body's response to words of healing. In a remarkable study by researchers at the U.S. National Institutes of Health, participants were asked to imagine being wronged, a theft, an insult, a betrayal, and to picture the moment when the wrongdoer either apologized or refused to. While participants visualized these scenarios, scientists measured their heart rate, blood pressure, and other physiological markers of stress. The results were profound. When participants imagined receiving a sincere apology, one spoken with genuine remorse, their cardiovascular systems began to calm, heart rate slowed, blood pressure dropped, muscles released their tension. Even the electrical rhythm of the heart became steadier. In essence, the body was responding to the imagined apology as if danger had subsided. The nervous system, which had been braced for defense, began to relax. The body recognized a message deeper than words, the signal of peace. Apology, then, is more than a moral transaction. It is a form of emotional co-regulation. One person's sincerity helps another person's nervous system return to balance. The human body, always listening beneath the noise of thought, understands the meaning of "I'm sorry." The power of restitution. But words alone, as powerful as they are, reach only part of the wound. In the same study, when participants imagined that the apology was followed by an offer to repair, to replace what was broken, or to make amends, something even more striking happened. Their emotional responses shifted. Anger melted into relief. The mental replay of the offense began to lose its intensity. Participants reported feelings of gratitude, warmth, and even renewed respect toward the person who had caused harm. This shows that apology, when paired with restitution, is a two-part medicine. The words calm the body. The action calms the mind. The body says, "I'm safe again." The mind says, "I matter enough for this to be made right." That sense of being valued, of being seen and worthy of repair, is one of the deepest human needs. It restores dignity to the one who was hurt and accountability to the one who caused the pain. Both are essential for healing to take root. The neuroscience of relief. When a sincere apology is received, the brain's limbic system, the center for emotion, sends signals to reduce activity in regions associated with threat and anger. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, begins to rise, fostering feelings of safety and connection. This biochemical shift explains why genuine apologies can bring tears or sudden calm. The body literally transitions from defense to trust. What's remarkable is that this happens even when the conflict isn't fully resolved. The apology itself, the recognition of harm, and the willingness to take responsibility is enough to change the body's chemistry. It's as though the nervous system whispers, "You can rest now. You are not alone in this pain anymore." Validation, the language of the nervous system. Psychologists often note that one of the most powerful effects of an apology is not the logic of the words, but the feeling of being validated. To be told, "You're right, that must have hurt," is to have one's experience mirrored back, to be seen emotionally and physiologically. Validation calms the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. It reduces cortisol, the hormone associated with chronic stress. This is why an apology can feel like the body is exhaling after holding its breath for too long. When a person feels acknowledged, their anger softens. They no longer need to fight to prove the legitimacy of their pain. The nervous system, once on high alert, begins to trust again. The restorative loop. A genuine apology doesn't just soothe the one who receives it, it also transforms the one who gives it. Neuroscientific research suggests that expressing remorse activates empathy-related neural pathways, reinforcing moral awareness and emotional balance. This means that apology is a healing loop. It restores equilibrium in both bodies at once. The one who apologizes releases the tension of guilt, while the one who receives it releases the tension of resentment. Both experience physiological calm, as though two nervous systems are quietly shaking hands. In couples therapy, this process is sometimes described as co-regulation. One person's tone, posture, and sincerity help the other's body return to stability. It's the biological foundation of reconciliation, two bodies learning again to feel safe together. The deep intelligence of the body. Apology reveals something profound about the human design. Our emotional and physical systems are intertwined. Conflict doesn't just live in memory, it lives in the body, in the tight shoulders, the shallow breaths, the racing heart. And healing, too, is embodied. When someone looks into your eyes and says, "I'm truly sorry," your body feels it before your intellect analyzes it. The muscles loosen, the breath deepens. The heart, which has been guarding itself, begins to open again. It's as if the entire organism recognizes the signal. The danger is over. Connection is possible again. From hurt to growth. Apology, especially when paired with sincere effort to make things right, does more than restore peace. It transforms pain into growth. It reminds both people that relationships are living systems, capable of repair and renewal. When someone says, "I hurt you and I want to do better," they're not just fixing a moment, they're tending to the ongoing ecosystem of trust. The act becomes a declaration of care, one that tells the other person, "You matter more to me than my pride." Over time, these small acts of repair accumulate. They build resilience in relationships, teaching both people that conflict does not signal the end of love, only the need for restoration. The quiet promise within, "I'm sorry." Perhaps this is why the words, "I'm sorry," carry such ancient power. When spoken with truth, they are not merely an apology, they are a promise that peace can return, that dignity can be restored, and that love can still live after pain. They tell the nervous system, "You are safe now." They tell the heart, "You are valued." And they tell the spirit, "It is possible to begin again." So as you prepare to rest tonight, let this thought settle gently in your mind. The strength of an apology does not lie in eloquence, but in sincerity.
In every real attempt to repair, in every word spoken with humility and care, there lives a quiet assurance that healing is always within reach. Because even after hurt, the human heart, when humbled and open, carries an astonishing capacity to heal, to forgive, and to love again.
Chapter 9. Forgiveness, the healing loop that keeps love alive. Forgiveness is one of the most extraordinary capacities of the human heart. It isn't simply a moral virtue or a polite gesture of letting things go. It is a deeply psychological, physiological, and even spiritual process that transforms both the forgiver and the forgiven. When forgiveness takes root, something inside the body begins to loosen. The tension that once lived in the chest softens, the breath deepens, and the mind, which had been replaying old wounds, finally begins to rest. Modern science now affirms what ancient wisdom traditions have long known. Forgiveness doesn't only free the soul, it restores balance to the body. It is one of the most profound forms of self-healing available to us as human beings. The biology of letting go. Researchers studying the physiology of forgiveness have discovered that holding on to anger and resentment keeps the body in a subtle state of fight or flight. The heart beats faster, muscles tighten, and stress hormones like cortisol circulate longer than they should. Over time, this chronic state of alertness erodes sleep quality, weakens the immune system, and depletes emotional energy. But when people consciously practice forgiveness, when they stop rehearsing the pain and start choosing peace, measurable changes occur. Blood pressure drops, heart rate stabilizes, brain scans show decreased activation in areas associated with threat perception, and increased activity in regions linked to empathy and emotional regulation. The very chemistry of the body begins to change. A study published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine found that individuals who practiced forgiveness-based therapy reported significant reductions in anxiety and depression, along with improved immune function. The conclusion was simple yet profound. Forgiveness isn't just moral, it's medicinal. The emotional architecture of forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harm. It doesn't erase memory or rewrite history. Instead, it changes the relationship we have with what happened. It allows us to step out of the loop of mental replay, that endless cycle of, they hurt me, they shouldn't have, I can't believe it happened, and into a space of release. In this way, forgiveness is not about pretending that everything is fine. It's about deciding that we no longer want to carry the weight. The moment we forgive, the nervous system receives a new message. The danger has passed. The body, always listening, begins to unclench. Sometimes forgiveness happens slowly, in layers. It begins as a thought, then deepens into a feeling, and eventually becomes an embodied peace. At first, the heart resists. It wants fairness. It wants acknowledgement. But with time, forgiveness reveals itself as the truest form of justice. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that restores balance. The healing of relationships. In relationships, forgiveness is the thread that keeps love from unraveling completely. When two people hurt each other, the space between them becomes filled with silence and hesitation. They orbit each other carefully, afraid to say the wrong thing. But when one person decides to forgive, truly forgive, something begins to shift. That act sends a powerful message.
I still see your humanity, even through my pain. It doesn't deny what happened, it simply says, I choose to see more than the hurt. This moment is the beginning of reconnection. Both hearts, sensing that the threat of rejection has lessened, start to lower their guard. The air changes, the body's chemistry shifts from cortisol to oxytocin, from defense to safety. Psychologists describe this transformation as a positive feedback loop of healing. It begins when one person offers an apology, a gesture that says, I understand you're hurt, and I feel remorse. That sincerity awakens empathy in the one who was wounded. The offended person starts to see the other not as a villain, but a fallible human being who feels regret. That empathy softens the heart and makes forgiveness possible. And once forgiveness takes root, it feeds back into the relationship, strengthening trust, deepening connection, and building resilience. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Apology invites empathy, empathy nurtures forgiveness, and forgiveness strengthens love. This cycle is more than emotional, it's biological. When we forgive, the brain releases oxytocin and endorphins, neurochemicals associated with bonding, safety, and relief. These same chemicals play a vital role in forming attachments between parents and children and between romantic partners. In other words, forgiveness reactivates the circuitry of love. It reopens the neural pathways that conflict once shut down. We begin to feel warmth where we once felt coldness, curiosity where we once felt contempt. The body, mind, and heart all conspire towards reconnection. When forgiveness happens, both people experience physiological regulation. Their heart rates sink, their breathing slows, and their voices soften. What began this pain evolves into mutual healing. Forgiveness as a daily practice. It's tempting to think of forgiveness as a single moment, a dramatic choice to move on. But in truth, it's a process. It unfolds quietly, like dawn replacing night. Forgiveness often begins with a small step, the willingness to imagine that the other person might also be carrying pain, or the decision to stop retelling the story of what happened, just for a day, to see how it feels. Sometimes forgiveness looks like continuing a conversation after silence. Other times it looks like resting your hand on someone's shoulder, not because everything is resolved, but because hope still exists. Even partial forgiveness, the first attempt to release resentment, creates a ripple effect. It loosens the grip of bitterness, making space for understanding to grow. The alchemy of transformation. The beauty of forgiveness is that it doesn't erase what was hurtful, it transforms it. Pain becomes wisdom. Distance becomes depth. What once divided can become the ground on which compassion grows. In that transformation lies one of life's quiet miracles. Love that has been tested often becomes stronger than love that has never been challenged. The scars remain, but they no longer ache. They remind. They say, we've been through this, and we learned how to heal. Forgiveness turns memory from a source of suffering into a source of strength. The gift we give ourselves. Ultimately, forgiveness is not something we do for others, it's something we do to reclaim our own peace. Holding on to resentment keeps us bound to the past. Letting go frees the mind, lightens the body, and restores emotional clarity. The act of forgiving allows the nervous system to settle and the heart to open again. It reminds us that no matter how painful the past, healing is always possible. So as you prepare to rest tonight, you might reflect on this gentle truth. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It is one of the strongest choices a human being can make. Because in forgiving, we release not just another person, but ourselves.
We let peace return to the spaces where pain once lived. And from that peace, a new warmth begins to grow. The quiet warmth of a heart that knows what it means to hurt, to heal, and to love again.
Section 4. Making Peace Together. The Cultural Side of Reconciliation.
Chapter 10. How Different Cultures Repair Relationships. Across the wide and intricate tapestry of human civilization, reconciliation has always been more than a private exchange between two wounded hearts. It is older, deeper, and grander than any single conversation. In many traditional societies, reconciliation is seen not as a mere act of courtesy or emotion, but as a sacred duty, a responsibility to restore balance within the fabric of life itself. When peace is broken, the entire community feels its tear. And when peace returns, it is celebrated as a renewal of harmony not only among people, but within the world around them. The communal nature of healing.
In much of the modern Western world, reconciliation often takes place in private, through conversations, apologies, or personal reflection. It is an emotional and psychological process, guided by honesty and empathy between individuals. But anthropology reminds us that this view is not universal. In many pre-industrial and indigenous cultures, reconciliation is collective, moral, and even spiritual. A conflict between two people is never considered theirs alone. It belongs to the group. Because every argument, every fracture, ripples outward through the community. To heal the wound between two individuals is to mend the invisible web that holds everyone together. Thus, in these societies, forgiveness is not simply spoken, it is performed, witnessed, shared, and sealed through ritual. Reconciliation becomes a public ceremony, a sacred event in which the community participates not as spectators, but as co-healers. Australia's ritual of seeing and settling. Among the Aranda people of Australia, reconciliation takes a strikingly symbolic form. When tensions rise between individuals or families, they perform a ritual known as Umbirna Ilirima, meaning seeing and settling. Instead of arguing or retreating into silence, the parties engage in what looks like a battle. But it is a sham battle, choreographed and bounded by custom. Spears and sticks are raised, but the strikes are ritual, not real. The anger is enacted, not inflicted. What unfolds is less a fight than a performance, a dramatic expression of frustration and emotion transformed through structure and tradition. By the time the ritual ends, the aggression has been released safely, witnessed by the community, and transmuted into peace. The closing of the mock fight is not about winning or losing, it is about balance restored, order renewed, and relationships cleansed of bitterness. Through Umbirna Ilirima, The Aranda demonstrate a profound truth. Even anger, when held in ritual's embrace, can serve the purpose of healing. The Andaman Islands Dance of Peace. Thousands of kilometers away, on the Andaman Islands, the Akabea people have their own remarkable approach, a ceremony known as the Dance of Peace. Here, reconciliation is not negotiated through words, but through rhythm and movement. When conflict arises, the community lays down weapons and gathers in a great circle. The people, including those who quarreled, begin to dance together. They sing, they laugh, they weep. The tears and the laughter mingle until no one can tell them apart. The ritual is not only emotional, but profoundly physiological. Dancing together synchronizes heartbeats and breathing patterns. It literally aligns bodies, helping anger dissolve into collective rhythm. The act of moving together reawakens the body's sense of connection, reminding everyone that peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the return of harmony. By the end of the night, through sweat, music, and shared vulnerability, what was once division has become unity again.
The Shilluk of Africa and the Sacred Oath of Peace. In the cultures of the Shilluk people of Africa, reconciliation carries an even greater spiritual weight. When disputes arise, the individuals involved participate in a solemn ritual of truth and vow. They gather before their elders and before symbols of the divine, often sacred objects, ancestral shrines, or elements of nature. Each participant takes an oath that invokes both social and spiritual consequences. They promise not to reignite the conflict, declaring that if they do, they invite illness or misfortune upon themselves. This is more than moral accountability. It is metaphysical. The peace achieved is not protected by laws or punishments, but by the sacred order of the universe. Breaking such a vow risks upsetting not only human harmony, but the balance between people, spirits, and nature. In this way, reconciliation is sanctified, guarded by forces seen and unseen. The Navajo Enemy Way. In the American Southwest, the Navajo people have long practiced a profound healing ceremony known as the Enemy Way. When warriors return from battle, whether physical or emotional, they do not immediately resume ordinary life. They undergo a cleansing ritual designed to wash away the spiritual heaviness of conflict. This ceremony purifies not just the individual, but the community that sent them. It acknowledges that even justified conflict leaves a spiritual residue that must be cleared before peace can fully return. The Enemy Way teaches a vital lesson for modern times, that resolution is not only external, but internal. It recognizes that after struggle, hearts must be lightened, and spirits must be cleansed before harmony can take hold again. Modern rituals of truth and reconciliation. Though we live in a modern, globalized world, echoes of these ancient traditions remain. When societies fracture on a grand scale, through war, oppression, or injustice, they too turn to ritualized reconciliation. After apartheid in South Africa, for example, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission served not only as a legal process, but as a national ritual of healing. Perpetrators faced victims in public hearings, confessing their actions in full view of the world. The process was painful, but profoundly symbolic.
truth-telling became sacred, transforming the act of confession into collective catharsis. Similarly, after the Rwandan genocide, the Gacaca courts revived an ancient communal justice system. Neighbors gathered to confront, confess, and forgive. It was not revenge that restored the nation, but the courage to face one another and speak the truth. These modern ceremonies, though structured in legal frameworks, carried the same ancient essence: to acknowledge harm, to mourn together, and to re-establish connection. The universal pattern of renewal. Across continents and centuries, the rituals of reconciliation share one purpose: to remind humanity that peace is not a solitary act. It is a shared creation. Whether through dance, oaths, ceremony, or confession, the pattern is the same. The movement from division to unity, from silence to song. In every culture, peacemaking mirrors the rhythm of life itself. Tension rising, release unfolding, balance returning. Even today, in quiet homes far from ceremonial fires or public hearings, we still echo these ancient gestures. A shared meal after an argument, a gentle smile after tears, a hand reached out in apology. Each one is its own ceremony of renewal. The timeless lesson. So, as you prepare to rest tonight, you might reflect on this simple truth that spans every culture. Reconciliation is not only about fixing what is broken, it is about remembering what connects us. From the Aranda's ritual battles to the Akabe's dancing, from sacred oaths beneath African skies to public truth-telling after oppression, every form of reconciliation carries the same heartbeat: the longing to return to belonging. Because in the end, every act of forgiveness, no matter how small, is a quiet ceremony of its own. It is humanity whispering to itself, "We can begin again." And in that whisper, soft but unbroken, lies the enduring rhythm of peace.
Chapter 11. The Power of Ritual, When Actions Speak Louder Than Words. Across all the ways humans make peace, one thread quietly runs through every culture and every age: the longing for symbolic closure. Words, however sincere, are rarely enough. We crave something tangible, something that feels real in the body: a gesture, a ritual, an act that marks the moment when conflict transforms into connection again. These symbolic gestures, whether through shared meals, gifts, or sacred ceremonies, are like the final punctuation at the end of emotional storms, the deep exhale that tells both heart and body, "It's over now. We are whole again." The language of symbols. From ancient tribes to modern cities, people instinctively seek actions that speak where words cannot. Anthropologists have long noticed this universal rhythm. After disputes, humans turn to acts that bridge silence: a meal shared, a gift offered, a drink poured. These are not mere customs. They are emotional bridges, reminders that the bond between us is stronger than the moment that broke it. Symbolic gestures serve a psychological and physiological purpose. When two people eat together after conflict, the act of synchronization, chewing, breathing, even eye contact, activates mirror neurons that foster empathy and safety. The body, through ritual, relearns trust. It's as if the gesture says what the heart has struggled to articulate: we can begin again. Rituals of peace in tradition. In native Hawaiian traditions, reconciliation often concludes with a makua interview, a gentle ceremonial meeting where families come together to restore harmony. After the truths have been spoken and forgiveness begins to form, everyone shares poi, a smooth dish made from taro root, along with warm tea. This act of eating together is not merely nourishment, it is communion.
In Hawaiian cosmology, taro is sacred, believed to be the elder sibling of humankind. To share it is to acknowledge kinship, to remind one another that beneath all hurt, we are still family. Every sip and bite becomes a small prayer for peace, transforming forgiveness from something abstract into something tangible, something the body can feel. Across cultures, similar gestures repeat. In Africa, Asia, Oceania, and beyond, the Igbo people of Nigeria seal reconciliation by breaking and sharing kola nuts, symbols of respect and restored unity. In Japan, business partners who've had a disagreement often end the conflict by sharing sake, each pour a wordless acknowledgement that harmony matters more than pride. These rituals reveal a truth older than civilization itself. To make peace is to act, not just to speak. The science behind the symbol. Modern psychology supports what ancient cultures have known for centuries, that symbolic acts help the brain close emotional loops. Neurobiological studies show that closure rituals activate areas of the brain associated with emotional regulation, such as the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. These regions help calm the stress responses triggered by conflict. In other words, ritual doesn't just feel healing, it is healing. When we mark reconciliation with physical action, the brain recognizes the conflict as resolved, allowing the nervous system to relax. Even small gestures like shaking hands or lighting a candle create sensory anchors that tell our subconscious this is the end of tension. Peace has returned. That's why people across time and geography instinctively create rituals of closure, from bowing in apology to writing letters of forgiveness they never send. Each act gives the heart and mind something to hold on to as they move from pain to calm. Ritual in the modern world. Though modern life may appear to have outgrown ritual, the instinct for symbolic closure persists, quietly woven into our institutions, our customs, even our technology. Think of a courtroom settlement where both sides sign a document. On the surface, it's a legal formality, but beneath that surface lies something deeply human, a shared acknowledgement that the conflict has been witnessed, processed, and resolved. The signature, much like the clasped hands beneath an ancient tree, carries emotional weight. It says, I am accountable. You are heard. We will move forward. Or consider how, after an argument between loved ones, we might end not with grand speeches, but with a simple gesture, a hug, a cup of coffee offered, a smile across the table. These are our everyday rituals of renewal, often unnoticed but profoundly felt. They mark the shift from separation to connection, from the language of me to the language of us. Even the digital age has its quiet echoes of ritual. The act of sending a heartfelt message or choosing to unblock someone after a long silence carries the same symbolic power as ancient reconciliation ceremonies, a sign that the door to peace has been reopened. Witnessing as healing. Across cultures, one theme repeats. Reconciliation thrives in community. Healing rarely happens in isolation. It asks to be witnessed. Anthropologists studying traditional societies note that peace rituals often take place before an audience, friends, elders, neighbors. These witnesses do not judge, they hold space. Their presence transforms a private apology into a collective renewal of trust. The same principle applies today. When families reconcile in front of others, when communities publicly forgive, or when nations hold truth commissions, the witnessing itself becomes sacred. It turns pain into shared memory, and memory into wisdom. In this sense, reconciliation is not just the repair of relationships, it is the reaffirmation of belonging.
To be seen in our act of peace is to be reminded that we are part of something larger, a social fabric that can fray but never fully tear. The small acts that restore us. Sometimes the most powerful rituals are the simplest. A handshake, a bow, the planting of a tree, lighting a candle in memory of a conflict's end. These gestures seem small, yet they echo through the nervous system and the soul alike. Planting a tree after reconciliation, for example, serves not only as a symbol of new beginnings, but as a living testament. The roots grow where bitterness once stood. Every season of its growth whispers the same message: peace takes time, but it lives. Even the simple act of preparing a meal for someone you've hurt can become sacred. It transforms guilt into giving, silence into nourishment, and separation into communion. Returning to the rhythm of being human. When seen through this lens, ritual becomes more than ceremony. It is a language of the heart that predates speech. Through symbolic acts, we externalize our inner healing. We give shape to emotions too deep for words. And in doing so, we restore not just relationships, but our connection to the rhythm of life itself, the eternal cycle of rupture and repair. So tonight, as you settle into stillness, think of the quiet power hidden in small gestures. A note slipped under a door, a shared cup of tea, a kind word after silence. These are not trivial acts. They are the sacred threads that weave humanity back together. Because to forgive, to reach out, to start anew, these are not just emotional choices. They are acts of creation. They are the rituals that keep the human story alive.
Chapter 12. East and West. Two beautiful ways of saying I'm sorry. Across the world, every human heart carries the same longing: to heal what has been hurt, to mend what has been broken. Yet the ways we express that longing are shaped by the cultures we grow up in, the histories we inherit, and the meanings we attach to connection itself. The need to make peace, to apologize, to forgive, to begin again, is universal. But the language of peace is spoken in many dialects. In some cultures, reconciliation is a deeply personal journey, an inner reckoning with truth and responsibility. In others, it is a collective act, a moral duty shared among families, communities, even ancestors. The difference is not just in words, but in worldview. One sees the self as a distinct individual, the other as a thread in a living tapestry.
Cross-cultural psychology helps us understand this difference more clearly. When researchers compare countries like the United States and Japan, two societies that embody these contrasting ideas of selfhood, they find that even a simple phrase like "I'm sorry" carries completely different emotional weight. The Western way: honesty and responsibility. In much of the Western world, particularly in the United States, an apology is understood as a declaration of accountability. To say "I'm sorry" is to admit fault, to stand before another person and say, "I was wrong, and I accept responsibility." It is a moral act of self-honesty, a demonstration of integrity. This approach comes from a worldview that values autonomy and self-determination. The Western self is seen as independent, guided by inner conscience and personal agency. When something goes wrong, repair begins within the individual. Apology, in this sense, is a way of reclaiming one's moral credibility, to prove that one can stumble, take ownership, and rise again with dignity. Psychologists call this form of reconciliation ego integrity repair. The individual strives to restore consistency between their actions and their values. It's not just about soothing the hurt between two people, it's about reaffirming one's character. Think, for instance, of a friend in the West who writes, "I've been unfair to you and I need to make this right." Or an executive who steps in front of cameras to publicly accept blame for a mistake, saying, "I take full responsibility." These are not just social gestures, they are performances of moral strength. In the Western cultural frame, courage lies in facing oneself. This makes the Western apology inherently psychological. It is about honesty, self-reflection, and the vulnerability to stand alone before another human being. The Eastern way: harmony and belonging. In Japan, the meaning of apology flows in a very different direction. Here, to say "I'm sorry," sumimasen, or gomen nasai, is not necessarily to confess guilt, but to express care for the relationship itself. It means, I recognize the strain between us, and I want to ease it. This kind of apology is not about moral failure, it's about social balance. Within the Japanese worldview, the self is not an isolated unit, but part of a web of interdependence. One's identity is shaped through relationships with family, colleagues, and the larger community. So when someone apologizes, they are not asserting moral accountability. They are restoring emotional symmetry. It's not "I was wrong," but "let's be right again, together." Because of this, Japanese people tend to apologize more often, even for things beyond their control: a train delay, a shift in the weather, someone else's inconvenience. To outsiders, it might appear excessive. But within this cultural frame, apology is an act of grace, a way of maintaining harmony. It reflects an ethic of empathy. I see how this affected you, and I want to soften that burden. There's also an aesthetic dimension to it. In Japan, social harmony is not achieved through confrontation, but through subtle gestures that preserve dignity on both sides. A bow, a lowered gaze, or a carefully chosen phrase carries meaning beyond words. These gestures keep the social air pure, free from the pollution of pride or anger. This approach, known in psychology as relational repair, places the well-being of the group above the comfort of the individual. It values cohesion, balance, and the continuity of trust, even when hurt remains quietly unresolved. Two faces of forgiveness. These cultural differences extend beautifully into the realm of forgiveness. In the United States, forgiveness is often understood as an internal process, a journey within the self. It means letting go of resentment, freeing one's heart from the weight of anger. This is what psychologists call emotional forgiveness. It is introspective and liberating. The idea that healing begins with oneself, even if reconciliation never occurs. In Japan, forgiveness takes on a more relational meaning. It is not only about personal peace, but about social restoration. Here,
Forgiveness is often a decision, a conscious choice to continue the relationship, even if emotional wounds have not yet fully healed. This is called decisional forgiveness. It reflects a belief that harmony, wa, must be preserved for the well-being of all. One is about inner release. The other is about outer balance. The Western form frees the individual. The Eastern form sustains the collective. And yet both, in their own way, are acts of compassion. When worlds meet, neither way is superior. Each reflects a deep truth about what it means to be human. The Western path teaches us the courage of honesty, to face our own flaws and seek redemption through sincerity. The Eastern path teaches us the grace of humility, to let go of ego and preserve peace through empathy. When combined, these approaches form a complete circle of human wisdom. One turns inward, seeking truth. The other turns outward, seeking harmony. One repairs integrity. The other repairs connection. Imagine for a moment if the two could coexist, if we could apologize not only to clear our conscience, but to ease another's heart. If we could forgive not only to find peace within, but to restore peace between. That synthesis of inner truth and outer compassion is where the deepest healing happens. The universal language of reconnection. When we step back and look across the globe, the differences between East and West become not barriers, but mirrors. They show us two perspectives on the same human longing, the longing to reconnect. In every culture, to forgive and to be forgiven is to remember that we belong. Whether we bow in silence or speak our truth aloud, whether we heal alone or in community, every apology carries the same quiet message: I still care. Across language, history, and geography, peace remains a universal dialect, one that requires no translation. So as you drift into rest tonight, you might hold this reflection gently, that every act of reconciliation, no matter where it happens, is part of one great story, the story of humanity finding its way back to one another. And perhaps in your own quiet way, you too are part of that story, one small voice in the timeless rhythm of healing that unites us all.
Section 5. Finding Calm After Conflict.
Chapter 13. When Emotions Take Over. Understanding Flooding. There are moments in every relationship when calm suddenly slips away. A conversation begins gently, but somewhere along the line, a shift occurs. Voices tighten, breathing shortens, the chest feels heavy. What started as a discussion becomes a storm. Words that once carried care now feel like sparks. In those moments, it often feels as though something inside us has taken over, something deeper and older than thought itself. Psychologists have a name for this experience: emotional flooding. In John Gottman's research, it's sometimes called emotional hijacking, a moment when the body's ancient survival mechanisms drown out reason, empathy, and communication. Flooding isn't just feeling upset, it's a physiological takeover, a wave of neurochemistry and muscle tension that transforms us from calm conversationalists into threatened animals. The biology of the storm. When we sense danger, whether it's a harsh tone, a disapproving look, or a perceived rejection, the body's sympathetic nervous system instantly reacts. Adrenaline and norepinephrine surge into the bloodstream. The heart races. Blood pressure rises. Muscles prepare for action. The mind narrows its focus, scanning for threat. To the body, conflict with a loved one feels no different than danger in the wild. The same system that once helped our ancestors run from predators now rushes to defend our pride, our dignity, our belonging. But what was once useful for survival can now sabotage connection. Because in modern relationships, the threat is not physical, it's emotional. Yet the body doesn't know the difference. The fight or flight response activates just the same, flooding the bloodstream with stress hormones that make empathy and reasoning nearly impossible. The rational part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control and compassion, begins to dim. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, takes command. It shouts, "Protect yourself." Logic fades. Instinct takes over. And so we react, sometimes sharply, sometimes by retreating altogether. We interrupt, we raise our voices, we withdraw into silence. We criticize, defend, or shut down. Gottman's research calls these patterns the 4 horsemen of relationship breakdown: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Each of them, in its own way, is not a flaw of love, but a symptom of flooding, the nervous system's desperate attempt to feel safe again. When words stop reaching the heart. Perhaps the most fascinating and humbling truth about flooding is that when it happens, language stops working properly. Studies in affective neuroscience show that when people are physiologically aroused, with a heart rate above roughly 100 beats per minute, their brain's auditory processing changes. The mind becomes so busy scanning for danger that it can no longer interpret words with nuance. Imagine one partner saying softly, "I didn't mean to hurt you," and the other, still flooded, hearing it as manipulation or dismissal. The words reach the ears, but not the heart. It's not that the person refuses to listen, it's that their body literally cannot. The survival brain has hijacked the conversation. This is why even the gentlest apology can fail during conflict. No matter how sincere the tone or how careful the phrasing, a flooded partner is locked in biological defense. To them, every sound feels like pressure, every gesture like threat. It's not unwillingness, it's physiology. The science of pausing. To truly repair, we must first honor this truth. You cannot reason with a nervous system in survival mode. No amount of logic can calm adrenaline. No perfectly worded explanation can reach a heart that still feels unsafe. The only medicine is time, breath, and space. When we pause, when we breathe deeply, walk away briefly, or sit quietly, the body begins to reset. Heart rate slows, muscles soften, the prefrontal cortex lights up again, bringing empathy and reasoning back online. Neuroscientists call this parasympathetic activation, the body's way of saying the danger has passed. And as it happens, perception changes. The same words that once felt harsh begin to sound softer. The same face that seemed distant now looks familiar again. This is why Gottman advises couples to take at least a 20-minute break when flooding occurs. That's roughly how long the body needs to metabolize stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. It's not avoidance, it's recovery. The human meaning behind flooding. Flooding is not a failure of willpower, and it's not proof of weakness. It's a reminder that love exists not only in the mind, but also in the body. Our nervous systems evolved to protect us from harm, but they never learned to distinguish between physical danger and emotional risk. When we feel hurt, embarrassed, or misunderstood, the body interprets it as threat. It wants to protect the heart the only way it knows, by fighting, fleeing, or freezing. Understanding this truth can transform the way we approach conflict. Instead of asking, "Why are they so defensive? Why can't they listen?" we might ask, "Is their body still in danger?" When viewed through this lens, conflict becomes less about right and wrong, and more about safety and connection. Learning to calm the storm. To navigate flooding, the most compassionate step we can take is self-regulation. When you notice your pulse racing or your thoughts blurring, imagine an inner voice saying, "Pause. The storm is here. Let's wait for it to pass. Step back. Breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Feel your shoulders loosen, your chest open." Even 2 minutes of slow breathing can begin to restore balance in the nervous system. You can also use grounding techniques. Feel your feet against the floor. Notice 3 things you can see, 2 you can touch, 1 you can hear. Place your hand on your heart and count your breaths until they lengthen. These actions signal safety to the body. They tell the nervous system you're home now. You're not in danger. When both partners learn to recognize and soothe their own flooding, communication transforms. Arguments that once spiraled into chaos begin to end in laughter or quiet understanding. The pause becomes a ritual of care, a way of saying our relationship matters more than winning. The gentle strength of awareness. To understand flooding is to understand humanity itself. It reveals that our reactions are not signs of brokenness, but of deep care. Our bodies trying to protect what they love most. But awareness gives us choice. When we know the storm is coming, we can step aside instead of being swept away. We can breathe, wait, and let calm return before we speak. And when calm returns, empathy follows. It's in that calm that we remember what the conflict was really about. Not anger, not pride, but the quiet wish to be seen, understood, and safe again. Returning to peace. As you prepare to rest tonight, consider this simple truth. Peace doesn't begin with words.
It begins with a calm body. When we learn to soothe our own storms, we make it possible to hear again, to listen not just with our ears, but with our whole being. Flooding, then, is not the end of connection. It is an invitation, a signal from the body that it is time to pause, to breathe, and to remember that love is not found in the argument, but in the quiet that follows. So breathe deeply. Let the heart slow. The storm will pass, and when it does, the world and the person beside you will sound different, softer, warmer, closer. Because in the end, every act of healing begins with this one moment of calm, the breath that turns chaos back into connection.
Chapter 14. The 20-Minute Reset. How a pause can save a relationship. There are moments in every relationship when conversation begins to slip away from understanding. Voices grow tense, hearts beat faster, and the air feels thick with emotion. You want to make peace, yet every word only seems to tighten the knot. It's not because you don't love each other, or because the problem is unsolvable. It's because your bodies haven't yet returned to calm. When emotions flood us, the body reacts as if it's facing real danger. The heart races, adrenaline surges, and the mind narrows its focus to defend itself. In this state, no matter how carefully we choose our words, the brain simply can't listen. Logic and empathy are temporarily out of reach. Before the heart can reconnect, the body must first feel safe again. The science of self-regulation. Psychologists call this process of returning to calm self-regulation, the ability to soothe the storm within and bring the nervous system back to balance. It's not just a skill for emotional strength, it's a biological necessity. Dr. John Gottman, one of the most respected researchers on love and relationships,
discovered something remarkable in his decades of work. When couples paused their arguments for just 20 minutes, their physiology changed. Heart rates dropped, muscles relaxed, cortisol and adrenaline began to clear from the bloodstream. When they resumed their conversation, their tones softened, and they could finally hear one another again. That number, 20 minutes, isn't random. It's roughly how long the body needs to metabolize stress hormones and restore a sense of safety. During that time, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that manages reasoning, empathy, and self-control, comes back online. The mind shifts from survival mode to connection mode. In simple terms, the pause gives the body time to remember that love is not a threat. The wisdom of the pause. Taking a break during conflict is not avoidance. It's wisdom in action. It's the ability to recognize when the conversation has stopped being productive and to step away before damage is done. The most important part is how that pause is taken. Imagine one partner saying, gently, "I need a few minutes to calm down. Can we continue after that?" Those words hold a very different energy than walking away in anger or shutting the door in silence. The intention behind the pause matters. It's not about escaping the problem, but protecting the relationship from the heat of the moment. During those 20 minutes, attention turns inward. You might breathe deeply, walk outside, or sit in stillness. The goal isn't to rehearse counterarguments or replay what was said. It's to let the nervous system unwind, to allow the heart and mind to catch up with one another. In couples observed by Gottman, this kind of break transformed interactions. After pausing, people returned calmer, kinder, and far more capable of empathy. Even the same words that once sounded sharp began to feel soft. Why it works. The reason this pause works lies deep in the biology of human connection. When the body is flooded with stress hormones, it can't distinguish between emotional and physical threat. The fight or flight system activates, narrowing focus to survival. In this state, no matter how carefully we choose our words, the brain simply can't listen. Logic and empathy are temporarily out of reach. By slowing your breathing and giving your body time, you reverse this cascade. The parasympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for rest and digestion, begins to activate. Heart rate slow, oxygen flow improves, and the mind opens again. In that physiological calm, we regain access to the qualities that make love possible: curiosity, compassion, and patience. The same argument that once felt hopeless can now become a doorway to deeper understanding. The emotional art of returning. When both people honor this pause, something beautiful happens. The next conversation begins not with accusation, but with curiosity. Instead of saying, "You never listened to me," it becomes, "Can we try again? I really want to understand." That small shift is everything. It changes the emotional landscape from defense to connection. The nervous system, now soothed, invites openness instead of resistance. Even beyond romantic relationships, this wisdom applies everywhere, in families, friendships, and workplaces. When tension rises, the ability to take space, breathe, and return with calm is a sign not of weakness, but of emotional maturity. It shows that you care enough to protect the bond rather than win the moment. A ritual of renewal. You can think of this 20-minute pause as a kind of ritual, an invisible act of care that says, "Before I speak, I will first find peace." You might use deep breathing, a mindful walk, or simply sitting in silence. Some people find comfort in gentle rituals, washing their hands under cool water, lighting a candle, or touching something grounding like a piece of fabric or a stone. These small sensory acts signal to the body that the storm is passing. What matters most is the intention to return not with the armor of pride, but with the warmth of presence. In relationships, Moments of pause are like the rests in a musical score. They are what allow the melody to breathe. Without them, conversation becomes noise. With them, even disagreement can become a kind of harmony. The quiet power of calm. The science of self-regulation teaches a profound truth. Peace begins in the body before it can reach the heart. Every slow breath, every mindful pause, every choice to wait before reacting is an act of love, both for the other person and for yourself. When you choose to pause, you're telling your nervous system, it's safe now, I can relax. And when your body believes it is safe, your words begin to follow the rhythm of kindness instead of fear. So tonight, as you prepare to rest, think of those 20 minutes not as wasted time, but as a quiet investment in peace. A small ritual of renewal that gives both hearts space to breathe again. Because sometimes the most loving thing we can say in the middle of conflict is simply, let's take a moment. And in that moment, beneath the slowing heartbeat, the steady breath, and the gentle silence, the real work of healing quietly begins.
Chapter 15. Why we react the way we do. Attachment and emotional triggers.
When two people argue, it often feels like something deeper awakens inside us, something far older than the argument itself. Maybe it's the sudden rush of heat in your chest, the feeling that you're not being heard, or the fear that this moment might change everything. Beneath the words and logic, there is something more primal happening. The nervous system, quietly interpreting the conflict as a threat. To understand why we react the way we do, why some of us fight harder while others shut down completely, we turn to one of psychology's most compassionate frameworks, attachment theory. The roots of attachment. Developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, attachment theory teaches that our patterns of connection are not random. They are the echoes of the emotional world we grew up in. Long before we could speak, our nervous systems were learning lessons about love, safety, and trust. A child who felt comforted and understood learned that the world was safe and that people could be trusted. Their nervous system came to associate closeness with calm. But a child who experienced inconsistency, neglect, or tension learned something very different, that love might disappear without warning, that attention must be earned, or that distance was the safest form of protection. These early lessons don't vanish with time, they live quietly in our bodies. They shape how we handle closeness, disagreement, and repair. In adulthood, every argument or withdrawal can stir those old patterns, reactivating the body's ancient alarm system. When conflict feels like danger, to the rational mind, an argument might just be a difference of opinion. But to the emotional brain, it can feel like a rupture in connection, a signal that love or safety might be lost. The amygdala, the brain's emotional sentinel, doesn't distinguish between a partner's cold tone and the feeling of abandonment a child once knew. It floods the body with stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine. The heart races. Breathing shortens. The mind starts searching for danger rather than understanding. This is what psychologists call flooding, a state where our physiological alarm system takes over. To the body, the conflict is not about who forgot to call back or who said the wrong thing. It is about survival. Will I still be loved? Am I safe here? For some people, that storm passes quickly. For others, it becomes overwhelming. The difference often lies in attachment, the invisible lens through which we experience emotional closeness and distance. The secure pattern, calm beneath the waves. People with secure attachment trust that love is stable.
They might still feel hurt or frustrated, but deep down they believe the relationship can withstand the storm. To them, conflict is like a wave, sometimes rough, but temporary. Their nervous system, grounded in trust, can calm itself. After a disagreement, they might take a deep breath, reflect on what was said, and reach out with empathy. This doesn't mean they never feel anger or pain. It means they have an internal anchor that keeps them from drifting too far from safety. Because they've learned that love can survive tension, they can repair without fear. The anxious pattern, fear of being left behind. For people with anxious attachment, conflict feels much more dangerous. Every raised voice or distant look can awaken a deep fear of abandonment. Their nervous system interprets the argument as proof that love is slipping away. This fear can manifest as urgency. They might speak louder, cry, or demand reassurance, not because they want to hurt the other person, but because they're terrified of being left. In their body, the conflict feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to reach for stability before it disappears. The anxious partner says, "Don't leave me." The avoidant partner says, "Give me space." Both are flooded. Both are afraid. Both are longing for peace, but reaching for it in ways that collide. The common thread: fear wearing two faces. When seen through this lens, anger and coldness are no longer opposites. They are twin expressions of fear. The anxious partner fears losing love. The avoidant partner fears losing safety. One clings, the other retreats. But underneath, both are protecting the same fragile thing: the longing to feel secure, seen, and understood. Understanding this doesn't erase pain, but it changes the story we tell about it. It allows us to move from blame to empathy. Instead of asking, "Why are they reacting like this?" we begin to ask, "What fear are they protecting?" Turning awareness into healing. When we recognize that our reactivity is not a failure of love, but a biological defense, something softens. We begin to see that our nervous systems aren't against us, they're just trying to keep us safe. The next time you feel your pulse quicken or your thoughts spiral during conflict, try this. Pause, breathe, and quietly name what you're feeling. I'm scared of losing them. I'm scared of being hurt again. This gentle awareness disarms the automatic defenses. It invites compassion for yourself and for the other person. Because when we realize that both people are simply scared in different ways, the argument stops being a battlefield and becomes a space for healing. Repair then becomes an act of courage. It's not about fixing the other person. It's about calming the frightened child within yourself and choosing to reach out instead of retreat. Over time, with empathy and consistent care, even those with insecure attachment patterns can learn to feel safe again, to trust that love can stay steady even when emotions surge. The heart's quiet lesson. So as you settle into rest tonight, perhaps ask yourself, when conflict arises, what is your heart afraid of losing? Because beneath every argument, every silence, and every sigh, there is a longing for reassurance, for safety, for love that does not vanish in the storm. And the beautiful truth is this: healing does not mean never being triggered again. It means learning to recognize the trigger for what it is, a call from the past, and gently guiding yourself back to the present, where love still lives, waiting to be felt again. In the end, emotional triggers are not proof of weakness. They are invitations to understand ourselves more deeply. When we meet them with tenderness rather than judgment, we transform them from sources of conflict into pathways of connection. Because the heart, no matter how frightened, always wants the same thing: to feel safe enough to love, and loved enough to feel safe.
Chapter 16. Communication and Dyadic Regulation. When two people are in conflict, it can feel as if each is trapped inside their own storm, separate winds swirling in opposite directions. Voices tremble, hearts race, and words lose their shape. Beneath the argument, what's really happening is not just a clash of ideas, but a clash of nervous systems. Two emotional worlds struggling to find their rhythm again. Repair, in its truest form, is not simply about solving a problem or finding the right words. It's about helping those two systems come back into sync. Psychologists call this process dyadic regulation, the art of calming not just yourself, but each other. It's what happens when a relationship itself becomes a vessel of safety, where one person's calm begins to soften the other's tension, and both hearts slowly find their way back to peace. From self-regulation to co-regulation. This journey toward harmony always begins within. It starts when one person, just one, recognizes the signs of flooding: the tightening chest, the quickened pulse, the heat rising behind the words. That person takes a breath, steps back from the brink, and chooses to find calm before continuing. That act of self-regulation might seem small, but it's profound. By calming our own body first, we begin to shift the emotional climate around us. It's like lowering the volume of a storm so that both people can finally hear again. But self-regulation is only half the picture. The deeper transformation happens when both nervous systems start to influence each other, when one person's steadiness begins to regulate the other's distress. That's dyadic regulation, a kind of emotional resonance that science now understands as biological. Our nervous systems are built to synchronize with those around us. When one person speaks softly or shows warmth through their eyes or tone, it signals to the other's brain, "You're safe now." The stress response begins to quiet. The heartbeat slows. The body, which was preparing for battle, now prepares to connect.
The science of co-regulation. Dr. John Gottman, who has spent decades studying the science of lasting love, found that this ability to co-regulate, to influence each other's emotions gently, is one of the strongest predictors of relationship success. In his research, even small gestures, an open hand, a nod, a smile, could completely shift the outcome of a difficult conversation. This isn't magic, it's neurobiology. Humans are social mammals whose brains are designed to read subtle signals of safety and danger. Through facial expression, tone, and body language, we constantly send and receive emotional data. When those cues communicate calm and compassion, the body releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. This chemical literally softens our stress response and makes empathy easier. In other words, connection itself is a biological tranquilizer. It reminds our body that we are not alone in the storm.
The soft startup, the gentle gateway to repair. But before emotional synchrony can happen, communication must open the door. The foundation of repair is emotional control, but the bridge between two people is built through language. Gottman calls this the soft startup, and it's one of the simplest yet most transformative tools in relationship science. It refers to how a difficult conversation begins. If it starts with blame, "You never listen to me," it triggers defensiveness. But if it starts with vulnerability, "I feel unheard and it hurts," it opens a window to empathy. The difference between those two sentences may sound small, but it changes everything.
The first invites walls, the second invites closeness. The first activates the body's defenses, the second activates compassion. When we speak from I instead of you, we shift from accusation to sharing. You always interrupt me becomes, I feel dismissed when I can't finish my thought. The emotion remains honest, but it's framed in a way that seeks understanding rather than victory. And when a partner responds, not with argument, but curiosity, can you tell me more about that? The nervous systems of both begin to regulate together. The emotional tempo slows, allowing the conversation to breathe. The healing power of listening. True communication doesn't live in the words alone, it lives in the listening. Active listening is more than waiting for your turn to speak. It's the full body experience of paying attention to the words, the tone, the pauses, and even the silence between them. It means setting aside the impulse to defend or correct, and instead stepping into the other person's world for a moment. When we feel genuinely heard, something extraordinary happens. The nervous system relaxes, shoulders drop, the breath deepens, the body begins to trust again. This is not poetic metaphor, it's physiological truth. The vagus nerve, which governs the body's calm response, activates when we sense safety in another person's voice or face. In that instant, empathy becomes not just a feeling, but a bodily state. That's why the phrase, "I understand," can sometimes mean more than "I'm sorry." Understanding reaches deeper. It tells the other person that their emotions make sense, that their experience matters, that they are no longer alone. The dance of regulation. In many ways, dyadic regulation is like learning to dance after stepping on each other's toes. At first, the movements are clumsy. One leads too fast, the other resists. But with awareness, patience, and kindness, the rhythm returns. One person takes a slower step, the other follows. Eventually, both begin to sense the subtle cues, the weight, the breath, the direction, and the dance becomes fluid again. In relationships, this dance is emotional. It's the slow, mindful act of adjusting to each other's energy until harmony is restored. Neither leads alone. Both listen to the music of the moment, and both surrender to the shared rhythm of repair. This is what emotional maturity looks like. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but attunement. It's two people learning, again and again, how to turn conflict into connection through patience and grace. The cycle of healing. When emotional regulation and communication work together, they create a self-sustaining cycle of healing. Calm enables empathy, and empathy maintains calm. The more we feel understood, the more our bodies stay regulated. And the more regulated we are, the easier it becomes to express understanding. Repair, then, is not about perfect words or dramatic gestures. It's about a tone that softens, a glance that reassures, a breath taken at the right time. These small acts accumulate until trust, once fragile, begins to rebuild. Even science confirms that relationships are not maintained by grand acts of love, but by thousands of micro-moments of attunement, those quiet exchanges where both partners feel seen and safe. The ripple effect of calm. As you drift into rest tonight, consider this. The calm you cultivate within yourself never ends with you. It ripples outward to your partner, your family, your friends, and even to strangers. Every time you choose to pause before reacting, every time you listen instead of defending, you are shaping the emotional climate around you. You are teaching others, through your presence, that safety is possible even in disagreement. And in that shared stillness, when two nervous systems settle into the same gentle rhythm, something sacred happens.
The storm that once divided becomes the space where healing begins. Because in the end, peace is not just a feeling we find alone. It's a rhythm we learn to share.
Section 6. Turning conflict into a story that heals.
Chapter 17. When Problems Take Over the Story. There comes a point in some relationships when the same conflict begins to play on repeat, like a melody stuck in a loop. The words change slightly each time, but the feelings stay the same: frustration, disappointment, distance. At first, both partners think they are arguing about a specific issue, but over time, it begins to feel as if the problem has taken on a life of its own, as if the relationship itself has been captured by an invisible story that neither person knows how to stop telling. In narrative therapy, this experience has a name: a problem-saturated story. It's what happens when the mind becomes so accustomed to conflict that it starts to filter every experience through it. The story quietly reshapes perception until it no longer feels like a passing disagreement, but an absolute truth. You might hear it in the familiar phrases people use during arguments: "He never listens," or "she's always critical." These statements may begin as moments of frustration, but when repeated often enough, they begin to harden into identity. The partner stops being a person who sometimes forgets to listen and becomes someone who never listens at all. The other stops being a person who occasionally expresses frustration and becomes someone who's always angry. It's as if the relationship, once a rich and layered novel, becomes reduced to a single chapter, one filled with tension, blame, and exhaustion. And slowly, that one dark chapter starts to expand, swallowing the others. How a story becomes a cage. Imagine a relationship as a vast book, its pages filled with laughter, late-night conversations, quiet acts of kindness, and shared dreams. In the beginning, each chapter brings new discoveries, moments of joy and growth, but when conflict becomes chronic, it's as though one chapter begins to rewrite the rest. The story of tenderness fades, replaced by the story of resentment. Both people forget that there were once entire chapters devoted to love, understanding, and connection. This is the danger of the problem-saturated story. It narrows the lens through which partners see each other. Every gesture becomes interpreted through suspicion, every word through the shadow of old hurt. The story begins to feel inevitable, even fated, as though the ending has already been written. But here's the truth. Even when we feel trapped inside the same narrative, the story is not the relationship itself. It's only one interpretation of it, a version that has gained too much power. And just as stories are written, they can also be rewritten. Stepping outside the story. In narrative therapy, the goal is not to erase pain or pretend conflict never happened. It's to gently separate the people from the problem, to remind both partners that the issue is not who they are, but something that exists between them. This shift might sound subtle, but it changes everything. Instead of, "You're so defensive," it becomes, "Defensiveness seems to get in the way when we try to talk." Instead of, "You don't care," it becomes, "Disconnection keeps showing up between us when we're both tired or hurt." By naming the problem as an "it" instead of a "you," both people move from being opponents to allies. The battlefield softens. The tone of conversation changes from attack to curiosity. When a couple learns to speak this way, the conflict itself starts to lose control of the narrative. The focus shifts from proving who's right to understanding what's happening and why. Rediscovering the forgotten chapters. Therapists who practice narrative repair often help couples remember the parts of their shared history that have been overshadowed by conflict.
They might ask questions like, when was a time you handled disagreement better? Or, what helped you reconnect after the last difficult conversation? At first, the answers may come slowly. The couple might struggle to remember moments of connection amid years of frustration. But then something remarkable begins to happen. Forgotten memories start to surface, tiny, beautiful details that the problem-saturated story had buried. A morning when they made each other laugh before work. A day when one quietly cared for the other during an illness. A moment when an apology, however awkward, was met with grace. These small, specific memories are powerful because they expand the story. They remind both partners that the relationship has always been more than its pain. Within it are patterns of care, resilience, and humor, threads of humanity that can still be woven into something whole. Reframing the narrative. Once those forgotten moments resurface, the language of the relationship begins to change. The sentence, "he never listens," might become, "sometimes it's hard for him to stay present when he feels anxious, but when he slows down, I know he really tries." Or, "she's always critical," might become, "she gets sharp when she's afraid I'm drifting away, but underneath, she just wants to feel close again." Notice how these new versions hold both truth and tenderness. They don't deny the pain, but they humanize it. They give each partner room to be flawed, yet still deserving of understanding. This reframing is not a trick of positive thinking, it's an act of empathy rooted in neuroscience. When people feel seen and understood rather than blamed, the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, calms down. In its place, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for empathy and problem-solving, re-engages. What began as a defensive standoff becomes a conversation grounded in curiosity and compassion. The power of reclaiming agency. As couples begin to reframe their shared story, something else quietly shifts. They realize they are not passive characters trapped in a script. They are co-authors. They have agency. They can write new dialogue, new beginnings, new endings. This realization restores hope. It transforms helplessness into possibility. When partners stop saying, "this is just how we are," and start saying, "this is how it's been, but it doesn't have to stay that way," the relationship begins to breathe again. That's the heart of narrative repair, not erasing pain, but rediscovering balance. It's about allowing the full story of a relationship to re-emerge after being buried beneath disappointment. It's a slow process, built on patience, small changes in language, and moments of shared reflection. But over time, the old problem-saturated story loosens its grip, and a new one, gentler, truer, takes its place. A reflection for rest. As you settle into rest tonight, perhaps take a moment to consider the stories you tell about your own connections. What roles have you assigned to others and to yourself? Are there chapters you've forgotten, moments of kindness or courage that deserve to be remembered? Because every relationship, like every life, is larger than its hardest chapter. There are always pages still unwritten, pages waiting to be filled with understanding, patience, and the quiet choice to see each other anew. And perhaps that's where peace begins, not in rewriting the past, but in remembering that the story is still unfolding and you are still holding the pen.
Chapter 18. Rewriting the Story Together. How Couples Heal Through Words. When conflict becomes the center of a relationship, it can feel as though the problem itself has taken on a personality, an invisible presence shaping moods, coloring perceptions, and dictating how two people speak to each other. What once was warmth and spontaneity becomes tension and caution. Every conversation feels like walking through the echo of yesterday's argument. But narrative therapy, a compassionate approach developed by psychologists Michael White and David Epstein, offers a quiet, hopeful way out. It invites couples to see that the real enemy isn't each other, it's the problem that has positioned itself between them. Through words, reflection, and meaning-making, they can step outside of blame and into a shared effort to understand what's really happening. At the heart of this process lies a deceptively simple but transformative technique: externalization. It begins with a shift in language that changes the emotional landscape entirely.
The power of maiming the problem. Imagine one partner saying, "You're always so critical." It's a phrase that instantly sparks defensiveness. But now imagine instead, "Criticism seems to have found its way into our conversations lately. It's making it hard for me to feel close to you." The difference is profound. In the first sentence, the partner is the problem. In the second, the problem becomes something separate. It's no longer you versus me, but both of us versus it. That small linguistic change does something extraordinary. It allows empathy to re-enter the room. When couples externalize an issue, they shift from accusation to collaboration. They stop trying to win and start trying to understand. Suddenly, both partners are standing side by side, looking at the same problem together. They might say, "Stress has been trying to pull us apart lately," or "Misunderstanding keeps showing up when we talk about money." These phrases turn emotional chaos into something observable and manageable. They make the invisible visible. And in that visibility, healing begins. From competition to collaboration. This change in framing moves couples from a state of competition, where each person defends their side, to a state of cooperation, where both work toward a shared goal. Instead of fighting each other, they begin to fight for the relationship itself. Imagine a couple, Emma and Daniel, who often argue about time together. Emma says Daniel is distant, Daniel feels pressured and misunderstood. When they learn to externalize the problem, the conversation transforms. They stop labeling each other and start naming the shared experience. Distance has been creeping into our evenings. It's making it hard for me to feel close to you. That subtle shift helps them see that neither one is the villain. Both are affected by the same emotional pattern, both are hurt by it, and both have the power to change it. Psychologically, this moment matters. When the brain perceives safety instead of threat, the amygdala, which governs fear responses, quiets down. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for empathy and reason, reactivates. What once was a battlefield becomes a space for understanding. The second step, reauthoring the story. Once the problem has been externalized, once it has a name and a shape, the next phase of healing begins, reauthoring. Reauthoring means rewriting the meaning of the story that the relationship tells about itself. Every couple has moments of struggle, but also moments of connection, resilience, and laughter. Moments when love quietly triumphed over pain. In therapy, these moments are called unique outcomes. They are the small but powerful instances when the problem lost its grip, even briefly. Maybe it's the night they stayed up talking until sunrise after weeks of silence, or the time one made tea for the other during an argument, an unspoken act of care in the middle of tension. Or perhaps a simple text message that said, "I still want to work on this." These moments are easy to overlook when hurt dominates memory, but they matter deeply. They are proof that the relationship has always contained the capacity for repair. As couples revisit these fragments, they begin to weave them into a new shared story, a we story. It's a narrative that says, "We've struggled,
but we've also shown strength. We know how to find our way back. This reauthored story doesn't erase the pain, it reframes it as part of a larger journey of learning and endurance. It reminds both partners that they are not trapped in a broken story, they are authors capable of rewriting it. The science of story and healing. Research in narrative psychology and relationship science supports this process. Studies show that couples who engage in narrative repair, who externalize their problems and co-create new stories, report greater emotional stability, lower stress levels, and improved communication. The reason lies in how the brain processes meaning. When partners find coherence in their shared experiences, their minds categorize conflict not as ongoing threat, but as resolved understanding. This shift literally lowers cortisol levels, the stress hormone, and increases the release of oxytocin, the bonding chemical that fosters trust and intimacy. In simple terms, storytelling helps the nervous system heal. It transforms emotional chaos into cognitive order. The memory of conflict stops feeling like danger and starts feeling like growth. From blame to belonging. As couples continue this process, something even deeper begins to unfold. The other person, once seen as the source of pain, slowly becomes a partner in healing. The dynamic moves from "you hurt me" to "we've both been hurting." From "I can't trust you" to "we're learning to trust again." This is the essence of dyadic healing, the idea that relationships can regulate, restore, and renew both people simultaneously. Through empathy and shared reflection, both hearts begin to calm in rhythm with one another. And this transformation isn't just emotional, it's neurological. The body's stress response systems synchronize, mirroring what psychologists call co-regulation. One partner's calm literally helps the other nervous system settle. Words become medicine. Shared storytelling becomes the heartbeat of renewal. The quiet power of hope. At its core, narrative repair is an act of hope. It says that no matter how tangled the story has become, two people can still step back, breathe, and begin again. Rewriting a relationship story isn't about pretending the pain never happened, it's about understanding what it taught you, about patience, communication, and the fragility of connection. It's about turning "we broke" into "we rebuilt." Every reauthored story carries the same quiet message. Love is not a single unbroken line. It bends, it falters, and sometimes it almost disappears. But when both people choose to return, to speak gently, to see clearly, to remember the goodness that still exists, they become the authors of something more enduring than perfection. Resilience.
A reflection for the night. As you prepare to rest tonight, think of the stories you've been telling about yourself, about someone you love, or about what once went wrong. Are those stories final, or could they be softened? Could they hold a little more kindness, a little more possibility? Because the truth is, every story, like every heart, can be rewritten. Even the most painful ones can become stories of growth if we choose to see them that way. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not the erasure of hurt, but the courage to pick up the pen together and begin again.
Chapter 19. Why sharing our stories helps us and others heal.
There is something timeless and profoundly human about stories, especially the ones that speak of love lost, love tested, and love restored. Across centuries and cultures, people have gathered to share tales of endurance and reconciliation, not merely to entertain, but to understand. Deep within our psychology, Storytelling is more than art. It is how we make sense of our pain, how we transform experience into meaning, and how we find the courage to begin again. When couples share their stories of conflict and healing, they do something quietly remarkable. They give shape to the invisible. They turn the chaos of memory into a thread of understanding. And as they do, they open a door, not only for themselves, but for others who may still be struggling to find their way out of the dark. The ancient medicine of story. Long before we had therapy, we had stories. Around firelight, in temples and marketplaces, people spoke of hardship and forgiveness, of loss and return. These stories were never told simply to recall events. They were told to remind listeners that pain and renewal are both part of what it means to be alive. Even today, storytelling continues to play that same healing role. In communities, spiritual circles, and family gatherings, it's common to hear older couples tell tales of the storms they once weathered together, the years when they barely spoke, the nights that felt endless with silence or misunderstanding. And yet, when they tell these stories, the tone is rarely bitter. It's warm, reflective, often touched with laughter. The focus isn't on the suffering, but on the endurance, the slow, imperfect, deeply human work of finding their way back to each other. Their message, spoken softly through time, is simple but profound. We made it through. Why these stories matter. For those who listen, such stories offer more than comfort. They offer perspective. They remind us that conflict, no matter how painful, does not always mark the end of love. It can be a passage, a refining fire that transforms the relationship into something deeper, steadier, more awake. Hearing that others have faced similar storms and found calm again allows us to exhale. It replaces isolation with recognition, despair with possibility. The listener's nervous system, wired to respond to safety cues, registers the story as hope. It's as if the storyteller's calm voice says, "You are not alone. Healing is possible." In the language of psychology, this is called vicarious resilience, the phenomenon in which hearing stories of endurance strengthens the listener's own capacity to heal. Research shows that shared narratives can regulate emotion, lower stress hormones, and foster empathy by activating mirror neurons in the brain. In other words, when we listen to a story of survival, our body quietly learns from it. Stories as blueprints for healing. But stories do more than inspire. They teach. Each one carries small lessons hidden between its words. A story might reveal how one partner learned to pause before reacting, or how another discovered the quiet power of a sincere apology. These are not instructions shouted across a classroom. They are lessons whispered through shared humanity. And because they come wrapped in emotion, they stay with us longer than advice ever could. For example, imagine a couple sharing how they once argued for weeks over something as simple as household chores. When they finally stopped fighting long enough to talk, they realized the argument wasn't about dishes at all. It was about feeling unseen, about the fear that care had faded. That realization changed everything. It taught them that behind every conflict lies an unspoken longing. Do you still value me? Do I still matter? When others hear such stories, they don't just nod in recognition. They absorb the insight. They begin to ask different questions in their own relationships. They listen with more tenderness. This is how wisdom travels from one heart to another, not through theory, but through story. Restructuring meaning, the psychology of renewal. Psychologists call this process restructuring meaning, the act of reframing our personal narratives to highlight growth instead of failure. When couples begin to view their relationship not as a tragedy, but as a story of learning and perseverance, something fundamental shifts. They move from the language of blame to the language of co-authorship.
No longer two people caught in an endless loop of who was right and who was wrong. They become collaborators in writing a new chapter. The story of what broke transforms into a story of what we built afterward. This shift has measurable effects. Studies in narrative psychology show that people who can form coherent, compassionate stories about their struggles report higher emotional resilience, deeper intimacy, and greater life satisfaction. In couples, this reframing strengthens trust and creates a shared sense of purpose. Through storytelling, the past no longer feels like a wound, it becomes a foundation. The memory of pain remains, but it changes shape, turning from something that divides into something that binds. From isolation to connection. Every time a story of reconciliation is shared, a quiet circle widens. A couple who once felt alone in their pain becomes a source of comfort for someone else. Their vulnerability becomes light for others navigating similar darkness. In support groups and therapy sessions, this ripple effect is visible. One couple's story of repair can soften another's defensiveness. A single phrase, "We thought it was over, but it wasn't," can reawaken the will to try. This is how communities of healing are built, not through advice, but through shared humanity, repeated gently in the language of lived experience. Storytelling transforms private suffering into collective wisdom. It reminds us that every healed relationship, every moment of forgiveness, contributes to something larger than itself, a shared archive of human resilience. The biology of story. Modern neuroscience gives us a glimpse into why storytelling feels so soothing. When we listen to a narrative, our brain releases oxytocin, the hormone linked to empathy and bonding. At the same time, activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain involved in self-reflection, begins to synchronize with that of the storyteller. This synchronization allows us to feel what they feel, to momentarily live inside their experience. That's why a good story can make your heartbeat slow, your shoulders relax, and your breath deepen. It's not just emotional, it's physiological. Stories regulate the nervous system because they provide coherence, a sense of order to what was once chaotic. They remind the brain that meaning has been found, and therefore the danger has passed. The continuity of the human story. Human beings have always been storytellers. Long before books or screens, we gathered around fires, retelling tales of hardship, courage, and return. Those ancient patterns still echo in every story we share today. When we hear a story of two people who almost broke apart but found each other again, something ancient stirs within us. We remember that love has always been fragile, but also enduring. Each story, no matter how small, becomes part of a collective memory, a reminder that relationships are not defined by perfection, but by persistence. Even in an age of endless distraction and quick goodbyes, stories remind us of something elemental, that connection is still worth tending to, even when it hurts.
A reflection for the night. As you prepare to rest tonight, think of the stories that have shaped you, the ones that softened your heart, that made forgiveness seem possible, that reminded you love can be rebuilt. Perhaps, someday, your story will become that light for someone else. Maybe your quiet resilience, your willingness to try again, will help another person believe that healing is within reach. Because in the end, every story of reconciliation, no matter how humble, becomes a beacon. It whispers across time and culture the same enduring truth, that even after conflict, even after silence, love can still find its way home. And perhaps that is the most human story of all.
Chapter 20. Finding Peace After the Storm. The Gentle Art of Closure.
There's a moment that comes after every storm, after the raised voices, the slammed doors, or the quiet tears. The air settles, the chaos fades, yet even as calm returns, a subtle heaviness remains. It lingers in the chest like a soft echo, reminding us that the heart has not fully healed. That feeling is the unfinished work of closure, the mind and body's deep longing for peace. Closure isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending the pain didn't matter. It isn't about rewriting the past or forcing forgiveness before we're ready. True closure is gentler than that. It's the quiet shift from asking, "Why did this happen to me?" to softly saying, "This is what I've learned from it." It's not erasure, it's understanding. And in that understanding, peace slowly takes root. What psychology teaches us about closure. Psychologists describe closure as a desirable psychological state, a place where emotional and cognitive processes align to help us move forward. It doesn't arrive all at once, but rather unfolds in stages, each one bringing the mind and body a little closer to calm. The first stage is understanding. After conflict, the mind yearns for coherence. It replays conversations, searches for motives, and tries to fit each piece of emotion into a larger picture. This is how the brain works when it's trying to heal. It seeks to make sense of what once felt senseless. For example, after a painful disagreement, one partner might think, "He ignored me because he didn't care," while the other quietly believes, "She yelled because she never understands me." But when both pause and begin to speak from a place of honesty rather than accusation, something deeper emerges. They might realize, "He pulled away because he felt overwhelmed," and "She raised her voice because she felt invisible." Understanding doesn't erase what happened, but it reframes it. It gives the mind a story that feels complete instead of fractured, and that shift alone begins to dissolve the tension that once seemed unending. When the body finally unclenches. The second stage is emotional relief, the body's way of saying, "You can rest now." Conflict keeps the body on high alert. The heart races, the muscles tighten, the breath shortens. All remnants of the body's ancient survival system, still wired to respond to emotional danger as if it were physical threat. Even after the words stop, that storm inside continues. You might lie awake, replaying each sentence, feeling the tension pulse behind your ribs. But the moment understanding begins, the body senses safety again. The nervous system gradually releases its grip. The breath deepens. The heart rate slows. Science calls this the parasympathetic response, the body's natural recovery mechanism. But on a human level, it feels like something simpler, a return to peace. When that physiological calm sets in, love becomes possible again. Not the idealized love of perfection, but the real kind, the kind that survives misunderstanding and chooses gentleness anyway.
Turning wounds into wisdom.
The third element of closure is what psychologists call felt
distance. It's the moment when the painful memory moves from now to then. The hurt is still remembered, but it no longer feels like an open wound. Instead, it becomes a scar, a mark of what was survived, not what still bleeds. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes gradually, often in small, almost unnoticed moments. A morning when you wake up and realize you didn't think about the argument first thing. An evening when laughter feels natural again. A time when the memory returns but no longer steals your breath. This is when the past becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. You can look back not to relive, but to understand. And in that understanding, pain quietly transforms into wisdom. The mind's release. The final layer of closure is reduced preoccupation. The moment the mind stops circling around the past, searching for what it has already found. Before closure, thoughts feel like waves that keep returning to shore. We replay conversations, dissect facial expressions, or imagine better endings. It's not obsession. It's the mind's way of trying to resolve what still feels incomplete. But once meaning is made, once the body and heart agree that the danger has passed, those mental loops begin to fade. The story no longer demands constant attention because it has been integrated. It now belongs in memory, not in daily life. At that point, you can recall what happened without being pulled back into it. The past becomes part of the story, not the story itself. Closure as storytelling. The journey toward closure mirrors the structure of every meaningful story. There is conflict, when emotions rise and relations strain. Then comes revelation, the moment of insight, of seeing what truly lay beneath the anger. And finally, there is resolution, the part where the story finds its ending, not in perfection, but in peace. When couples talk through their conflict, when they sit together after the storm and speak not to defend, but to understand, they begin to rewrite the narrative. The memory of pain becomes a testament to endurance, proof that love is not fragile but resilient. This is what psychologists call meaning-making, the process of turning chaos into coherence. Research shows that couples who can construct these shared resolution narratives experience greater relationship satisfaction and emotional health. In other words, when you can tell the story of your pain with gentleness and understanding, your mind no longer treats it as danger. It recognizes it as growth. The gentle alchemy of healing. Closure is a kind of emotional alchemy. It turns confusion into clarity, grief into gratitude, and pain into something with purpose. Every healed argument, every moment of reconciliation becomes part of a greater pattern, a quiet reminder that even rupture can lead to renewal. The memory that once hurt becomes a story you carry not with bitterness, but with grace. This is the art of repair. It's not loud or dramatic. It happens in whispers, in the soft, "I understand now," or the unspoken forgiveness exchanged through a quiet look. It's the courage to keep the heart open even after it's been bruised. A reflection for the night. As you prepare to rest tonight, perhaps take a moment to think of closure not as an ending, but as an integration. It's the moment when pain folds itself into understanding and becomes part of the story of who you are. When every scar stops feeling like a flaw and starts feeling like proof of healing. Maybe closure isn't about moving on, but about carrying forward, with peace instead of weight, with tenderness instead of tension. Because every conflict, once truly understood, becomes a quiet teacher. And in the stillness that follows, when the body is calm and the heart finally exhales, you may find something even deeper than resolution. You may find grace.
Conclusion. Why repair, not perfection, keeps love alive. In every lasting relationship, there's a quiet truth that few of us are taught early on. Love isn't sustained by perfection. It's sustained by repair. Science has made this clear again and again. Perfect relationships don't exist. The pursuit of perfection often drives people to hide their flaws, to suppress their emotions, or to avoid the vulnerability that real intimacy requires. Perfection makes people careful. Repair makes people connected. What keeps two people together through the storms of life isn't their ability to avoid conflict. It's their ability to find their way back to each other when it happens.
As John Gottman, one of the world's leading researchers on relationships, observed, even couples who face the so-called four horsemen of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling can thrive if they've learned to repair. The difference between couples who stay together and those who drift apart isn't how many conflicts they have, but how often they tried to mend them. Repair, not avoidance, is the true foundation of resilience.
The art of repair is not a single act. It's a layered skill, a quiet hierarchy that moves from the body to the heart and from the heart to the mind. It begins with the physiological, because the body is always the first to respond to tension. A quickened heartbeat, a tightening chest, a rush of heat, all signs of emotional flooding. The first task in repair is learning to calm the storm within. That's why something as simple as a 20-minute break can be powerful. When you pause, breathe, and allow your body to metabolize stress, you create the physiological safety that makes emotional connection possible again. From there, repair becomes behavioral. It's not only about saying the right words, it's about gestures that bridge distance. It's a partner reaching out a hand after an argument, or saying softly, "Let's start over." It's not only about making repair attempts, but also about recognizing and accepting them. Sometimes a small act, a gentle smile, a shared laugh, or a quiet "I'm sorry" carries the weight of reconciliation. These moments may seem ordinary, but they are the small threads that weave love back together. Then comes the emotional level, where empathy begins to rebuild trust. Empathy is the ability to step into the other's world, to say, "I see how that hurt you," without defensiveness or justification.
It's where a full apology takes shape. Not just words of regret, but also the offer to make amends. A genuine apology works on two levels. It soothes the body by conveying remorse, and it restores the mind by offering restitution. When both are present, the heart begins to open again. Finally, repair reaches the cognitive level, the level of meaning. This is where partners look back on what happened and begin to reframe it, not as a failure, but as part of their shared story of resilience. They create a we story, one that acknowledges the pain but celebrates the growth. By externalizing the problem and seeing it as something they faced together, they find psychological closure. The event no longer feels like an open wound. It becomes an integrated memory, a quiet reminder that love can endure imperfection. At the foundation of all this lies something deeper still: friendship. Gottman often calls it the emotional bank account, the reservoir of goodwill that couples build through small daily acts of kindness and connection. Every shared laugh, every gentle word, every moment of appreciation adds to that account. And when conflict arises, it's this emotional reserve that pays for repair. It allows each partner to interpret the other's clumsy attempt at reconciliation not as manipulation, but as sincerity, as an invitation to return home. In the end, what sustains love is not the avoidance of rupture, but the courage to face it with tenderness. It's the repeated act of saying, "I choose to come back." Over and over, in small ways and big ones, partners who repair remind each other that love isn't a constant harmony. It's the music of two people learning, again and again, how to find their rhythm.